Behind all the raw beauty in the untamed West Virginia mountainside are deep-rooted secrets, lies, and betrayal, and a small, close-knit community is upended.
I was just calling to see if you knew when everything surrounding the investigation is going to be over.
I don't understand what you mean by the investigation.
They're asking people very personal questions about me and my husband's relationship, but I just can't keep living this way.
And at the center of all that unraveling is this couple, the Cochrans.
It was on a Tuesday night on December the 23rd, 1980, 10:36 p.m. Michael Brandon Cochran was born into the world.
Tell me about Michael as a boy.
He was a good kid. He always minded me. You know, Eddie came into his life when he was 8 years old.
When I met Michael, he had like a rat tail haircut and with the spiked hair. We just kind of developed a good, warm relationship.
What about sports, though? And he was really into sports.
Oh, yeah. He was playing like the pee-wee baseball. You could just tell right then. He just took to it and was just like a natural.
And Michael Brandon was always playing baseball, basketball, football. He lifted weights as a hobby. He had a weight bench in his room. He got his first Sandfield barbell set around 10 or 11 years old. And he would just go in there and turn his music up loud and just start working out. He just loved being healthy. Of course, he loved the muscles. He loved the way it made him feel. In high school, they started having like powerlifting competitions. And Michael, he got first place. We were really proud of him.
At age 17, Michael meets a girl named Natalie Jessup, also 17, during a trip to the mall. It will change his life forever.
We had to go out to the sporting goods place one day, and there she was working behind the counter. And she was flirting with him really bad, you could tell that. And then the next thing I know, they were dating.
She seemed to be a relatively driven student in school. She was passionate about what she did. She loved her family.
After high school, both Michael and Natalie head off to West Virginia University, where he studies computers and she studies to be a pharmacist. The two freshmen had just started their first semester at WVU when Michael's mom, Donna, gets a call from Natalie.
They got engaged in November of 1999. And when Michael got on the phone, I just said, "Michael Brandon, what in the world are you doing?"
Were you happy for him to be marrying Natalie?
I wanted him to wait. He had just graduated high school like maybe 5 months before. And I wanted him to just, focus on his schooling. And then 6 months later, they were married.
The couple are the picture of happiness in their wedding photo. After graduation, they later have 2 children. And after 6 years of marriage, they settled in Daniels, West Virginia, here in this colonial home.
It's a beautiful home on almost 4 acres of flat land. Michael renovated that house. He just completely gutted it and remodeled it from top to bottom.
As the years went on, did they have a happy marriage?
As far as I know, they had a happy marriage.
Yeah, they're starting their life now, and starting their family. They've got good jobs.
Natalie was working as a pharmacist, and Michael was in IT.
Yes, information technology. Yeah, it was like running cable wire, coaxial cable, and things like that.
Life in West Virginia can kind of be summed up as like, here people really focus on work, family, and their faith.
How was Michael as a dad? He was a proud dad. He doted on his kids and was a good provider, was involved with them, the school activities and stuff.
The couple gets involved in their community.
He was a football coach and he was a baseball coach.
And wherever Michael was, you'd find Natalie working the sidelines.
She was a sports socialite. When Michael was the coach, she was the one you got all the information from. She was the one that ordered the uniforms and got your sizes.
He loved sports, and that was probably our biggest connection. Our family would see their family at games, and that's really how it got started, is just loving sports and hanging out.
Are there stories that you remember that when you really do think back to you all as couples, it kind of warms your heart that you remember?
Oh, yes. Mike and I, we won a lot of championships together, coaching our kids.
Chris and Jennifer Davis bonded with the Cochrans over Little League, their young families, and church. They even went on vacations together. Chris, a lawyer, was hired by Michael for a legal matter, and the two became friends. What was it that made them sort of fit into your world?
It was really the family aspect. They were a great couple. They loved each other. They always wanted to be together. We gravitate toward friends who are always together and love their spouses, because we're always together.
So you were really close.
Yes, we were very close.
So at some point then you discover that one of your sons has diabetes.
Initially, it's very grim because it's, hey, this is what this is. It's never going to change, and this is what it's going to require.
Coincidentally, Natalie happened to specialize in diabetes management. How helpful was that for you in the beginning?
Tremendous.
Tremendous.
She was amazing. Like, she just gave us all the information we needed, because you learn as you go.
So she understood how insulin could affect the body.
1,000%.
Then, seemingly out of the blue, the Cochrans make a career change and open a new business. So they seem to be doing well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They're doing very well.
I invested and I spent $256,000.
And this new venture will lead them straight to the CIA.
Everybody is very involved with their kids around here, into sports, and that's where parents usually hang out, at school sporting events.
Just like his dad, Michael Cochran's son loves sports, especially baseball. And it's a family affair. With Michael coaching local youth sports leagues, Natalie becomes treasurer of the middle school baseball program.
She was heavily involved in that because Mike was a coach. They were involved in tons of leagues and different things.
So you were all involved as friends in the sports world with your children.
Yes, that's correct.
We met the Cochrans because I had put my son into the draft for the Little League Baseball.
Toni McCall met Michael and Natalie after her husband died of leukemia, leaving her a single mom to 3 children.
Michael very much took on a father figure role, especially for Cash. He was so good to him. He took him everywhere. They went fishing. They went to practices. It was the dream come true to have that father figure when you don't have one for your kids and you want one.
The Cochrans are a busy couple, both on and off the field. They open a business that is supposed to provide supplies to the federal government. It's called Tactical Solutions Group, or TSG, and they soon begin looking for big investors to help them pay the upfront money that is sometimes needed for government contracts. And to everybody's surprise, Natalie up and quits her job as a pharmacist, jumping into the new business completely.
Great. You know, I mean, if you can quit your job as a pharmacist, like, oh, wow.
By all accounts, the new business appears to be flourishing.
They were building onto their house, and they put up a new fence. Mike got a car.
So they seem to be doing well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They're doing very well.
Natalie tells friends they were inspired by that movie War Dogs, the one about 2 men with no experience in the defense industry who become arms dealers to the U.S. military and get in way over their heads.
They call guys like us war dogs, bottom feeders who make money off of war without ever stepping foot on the battlefield.
When she told me that we're going to make all of our employees watch War Dogs as like an onboarding video, I said, well, you do realize that the guys went to jail, right?
It might surprise people to know that any civilian can seek a government contract. All you have to do is register, and then you can start bidding. It can be a small business, an individual, a nonprofit agreeing to provide goods or services to the government at a specific rate at an agreed upon time.
The process is you discover the contract, you bid on the contract.
And if you're chosen, suddenly you're in business with the U.S. government.
The Cochran's website for their business, TSG, boasts impressive clientele from within the government, including the Department of Defense, FEMA, Homeland Security, and the CIA.
Tactical Solutions Group was supposed to be a whole goods seller, so they could sell healthcare equipment, masks, firearms, and various things like that.
Michael Cochran would spend hours sifting through all of these government contracts. And he would tell Natalie what he'd found. She'd go to the investors and say, Michael found the most incredible investment.
What did you know about what this business was all about?
They got this niche, a woman-owned small business. The idea of the federal government will pay $50 for a $10 hammer. You just got to be able to get in there and get the contracts and fight with the big guys.
And all the couple needs now is a little startup cash.
Most of their investors were friends, family, people that they knew.
We invested $245,360.69. That was our retirement savings.
Michael's mom, Donna, remembers the first time Natalie approached her about investing in the family business. Do you remember what she said?
Yeah, she asked us if we wanted to do the government contract. She said that she wanted to help us out, when we got ready to retire.
At what point did you decide that maybe this was something you might be interested in getting involved in?
About a month later, she told me that she was doing it for her parents, that they'd made $60,000 in 5 months. And so we thought, well, maybe we'll give it a try.
That's a pretty good return.
Yes, ma'am, it sure is.
Donna Bolt says her daughter-in-law claimed she could get her initial investment back with profit, sometimes in as little as 10 days. So when they come to you for a potential investment, what's your initial thought?
Well, my initial thought was, sure.
The Cochran's close friends, Chris and Jennifer Davis, say the couple approached them after church saying they needed some major cash to fulfill a contract for dental labs, saying if they didn't get the money right away, they'd lose the entire contract.
But it was more than just, hey, do you want to invest? There were supposed to be dental facilities on military bases. That's why we couldn't see any of the documents. Because she knew I was going to ask that. I was like, well, what's the well, you can't see it. You don't have authorization. We can't do that because it's the Department of Defense. And so we were like, sure. Yeah, man, we'll help out.
How much were you investing?
$511,000.
When Chris Davis hears who's investing, he says it seems like a safe opportunity.
I trusted all those names and people in the community.
So if they were involved, it must be sound and good.
Absolutely. The names that were lining up, it fit. Like, okay, these people aren't going to do anything crazy.
Tony McCall says the circle of trust was how she too decides to invest.
She had pulled someone in that I was close to and had been getting them to do contracts.
She says that person calls one day with an opportunity for the two of them to go in on a contract, but they've got to do it immediately.
It pays out in 45 days, but you have to do it right now. Like eBay, she bids at the very last minute so that nobody can go in and bid over top of her. But you have to tell me right now. And so I did it. I spent $256,000.
By all accounts, it seemed to be a safe bet. The Cochrans appear to be doing well.
I had seen the money that they were spending.
They had multiple vehicles, they had motorcycles, they were buying trips overseas.
The Cochrans are living the high life, but then suddenly the youth sports league is broke.
This ain't good. I really felt in my heart that something was going on.
You don't have anything, it's all spent.
Could something be afoul at the Little League? In the small community of Beckley, West Virginia, after just a year, Natalie and Michael Cochran's business is doing very well. And family and friends noticed the couple seemed to be too.
It appeared that Natalie and Michael were quite wealthy, and they were living like they were.
They had multiple vehicles, they had motorcycles, they were buying trips overseas to Paris, they went to Hawaii.
You know, we just thought it was wonderful. We just thought they were doing so good that we were so proud of them.
I mean, they had 3 homes, a pickup truck, motorcycles, a nice antique car.
Him and Natalie drove up in a 1965 Shelby Cobra. It was a kit car. It was just something that they bought, and we were just very happy. We even took a ride in it.
They were living much higher than the majority of people in Beckley, West Virginia.
Did you see a difference in how their lives seemed to be changing?
Oh, yeah.
You were on vacation together. What kind of vacations did you take?
We did beach vacations, and then we went to New York City a couple of times with them.
Yeah.
And so the typical sightseeing, shopping.
Everybody got along?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
it was fun.
It was great.
It was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun.
From the outside, it appeared that a lot of the spending was on Michael's side.
This was wealth that he had not experienced before, so he wanted to take advantage of it. Some of the things that Michael Cochran purchased in this period were recreational vehicles, an airplane hangar. He had ambitions and endeavors to open up an aviation branch to this business.
He really, really wanted to fly, and he loved that type of stuff. He was working on his pilot's license. Now, he wanted to fly helicopters.
They were a great couple to get that kind of money. They were doing things for people, and I mean good things.
Michael especially was doing a lot of charity work. He donated a weight room to a local middle school. When he found out his youth pastor was going to be homeless for a while, he actually purchased a property for him to live in.
Natalie even gets involved with local organizations and charities.
She volunteered and wanted to do this and wanted to do that.
She was helping us with juvenile diabetes research, all the fundraisers for that. And then we did a 5K run. She was good at that. She would organize it, get sponsors, get the word out.
One time she and Mike were at the house, and she told me that they were going to buy a town in Africa because that was going to be their mission, you know, pay for everyone's home and build homes.
Natalie also helps raise money for the middle school baseball league. Their friend Chris is board president.
We had a fundraiser, and from the fundraiser, we believe we raised a little over $15,000. It was a big deal.
As treasurer of the Little League, Natalie manages the bank account. But members get suspicious when the money all but disappears. But you knew there was a big chunk of money in there.
Yes, there should have been over $20,000 in there. Absolutely.
Any idea of how it was drained like that?
Nobody knew it was missing until we were told it's missing.
The league brings in a private investigator to look into where the money's gone.
And I talked to the board and I explained to them, you don't have anything but $31 in a frozen bank account. There's no records of anything as to where this money went. It's all spent.
There was an audit that was done. There were purchases made that weren't approved by the league.
And there was purchases to TJ Maxx, purchases to Olive Garden. And then when I started adding it up, I'm like, $32,000 in one night you raise for 2 sports teams, and it all just disappears. I mean, there's no way to rectify that.
Questions are now swirling over the missing money and if Natalie could be involved. And when some investors with the Cochran's business get wind of it, they're getting concerned about the money they've been promised. As time is going on and you're not hearing anything, are you starting to panic at all?
We'd ask. We'd say, Natalie, we need our money. I said, our car's going to break down. We need the money back. She would say, it's coming, I promise. And then she would send me text messages and say, your money is going to be deposited in your bank account within the next 24 hours. And we'd wait, and it was never there.
You didn't get anything?
No.
Donna says that any communication she had about the couple's business was typically with Natalie. not her son.
Every time that I received any kind of message, it was a text message from Natalie. It was she and I that was constantly going back and forth with contracts.
Meantime, Natalie continues to portray the business as extremely successful.
From the outside looking in, I would have probably been like pretty impressed. Thought, man, right here in Raleigh County, West Virginia, these people are knocking it out of the park.
One investor says it's astonishing how much money Natalie says she's pulling in.
She did give me a number at the time. This was like $343 million we're going to have to put in this bank. That was a little hard to believe.
Natalie and Michael tell a local bank their business is worth more than $500 million when they apply for a $100,000 loan.
Was her business worth $500 million? No, absolutely not.
It turns out the Cochran's business is not what it appears to be.
I said, in pure West Virginian, this ain't good. I really felt in my heart something was going on.
The fundamental problem is that it was all a lie.
And when secrets come to light, it's far worse than anyone could have imagined.
There is nothing wrong with doing well and having a successful business.
The Cochrans and their business, Tactical Solutions Group, put themselves out to be legitimate government contractors who were bidding on legitimate government contracts.
She always made all of them look like they were good investments.
The problem is there never was any legitimate income flowing from government contracts. All the money and cash flow is coming from investors.
There were no contracts. There were never any contracts. There were never any bids. It doesn't exist.
The businesses didn't exist at all, really, legitimately.
They existed on paper.
It was clear that it was a Ponzi scheme.
When it comes to a Ponzi scheme, there's no real business. There's no money being generated. Early investors get paid by new investor money, like shifting poker chips from one pile to another. And as long as the money's coming in from new investors, the Ponzi scheme can continue.
If you're just taking one investor's money and giving it to another investor as if it's a legitimate return on their investment, that's a fraud.
I said, no, these are friends of mine. I've seen what they've done in the community.
Successful Ponzi schemes almost always rely on trust, and you often find that people start very close to home.
The Cochran business model seemed to be built on defrauding their friends and family. Many of them knew them their entire lives, and they had no reason to not trust them.
It would hurt a lot less for this to have been someone that I didn't know that had scammed me out of money. It would hurt a lot less. I was already wounded from my husband passing away, and my kids the same.
These were friends, neighbors, and family members who were defrauded, and the question is whether Michael knew about it.
Michael was not the brains of the couple. He was a great guy, but Natalie was the brains of the operation. And Michael would look for contracts on the government website, and then he would give them to Natalie, and she would make the bid.
Had Michael expressed any concerns, any doubts about the business to you?
Not about the business. He was stressed about the government. He did not understand why the government will not give them their money, and he just couldn't figure it out. How can they do this?
But of course, the federal government didn't owe the Cochrans any money because they'd never conducted any business with them.
Michael Cochran was asking her questions very similar to the questions being asked by the investors who were trying to get their money back.
She was giving the same excuses to Michael that she was giving to the investors.
Natalie would tell me, we're being audited. There's a government shutdown. There was always some excuse with her.
The lives and paychecks of some 800,000 federal workers hanging in the balance.
Around Christmas time in 2018, there was a government shutdown, and it lasted until January 25th of the following year.
Day 32 of the government shutdown, now beginning its second month. We have never seen this.
Natalie used this whole government shutdown to her advantage. Her investors were coming and saying, we want our money. We'd like to pull it out. And she would say, well, I can't. The government is shut down. There's no way to get access to your money. They're not paying anybody.
She had a never-ending list of reasons that they were not seeing their returns.
When she could no longer blame the federal government for the delays, she turned to, I guess, more of the emotional side of, saying that she had cancer.
We're feeling bad for her. She even told us that she had cancer, that she wasn't going to do anything about it, that she was going to let God take care of it. And if he took her on, then that would be fine. And I just got so distraught and emotional, and I kept telling her she needed to fight, not to give up.
She said she was in stage 3. Her and Mike were talking about not going through chemo and radiation and just living what life she has left.
Was that devastating?
Oh, completely.
We were all pretty devastated. To the point, we all get the paperwork to go get our bone marrow tested to see if there was any way we could help her.
Remember, Toni McCall had lost her husband to leukemia. She was skeptical about Natalie's claim of having cancer.
I believe that Natalie used the leukemia to stall on having any payments. I knew she didn't have stage 3 leukemia because it's not in stages, it's in types. Everything pointed to the fact that she did not have it. She had told us that she was losing her hair from the chemo she was taking, and she flips her hair over and she has the perfect dime-sized circle where she has shaved a spot in her hair. And if you lose your hair from chemo, you don't see 5 o'clock shadow. What woman would shave a spot on their head to say, look, I'm losing my hair? And so I absolutely knew at that point that she would do anything to cover up and to lie.
Then early one morning, Michael and Natalie are set to take a private plane to Virginia for a scheduled bank meeting, but they never make that flight.
I just kept asking her, what happened? What happened?
On the morning of February 6th, the plan was that the Cochrans, Michael and Natalie, were going to fly to Virginia to visit the Bank of America there.
She had text messages going with me and Jennifer.
So the morning of February 6th, they were going to go take a flight.
She said she was too sick to fly. She had the flu and the norovirus, and it hit her so hard because of her cancer. She had gone to the doctor, and they put her on such a high dose of steroids that her blood sugar was elevated. She had asked to borrow a vial of insulin.
So she needed a bottle of your son's insulin?
Yes. And I told her that Chris was getting ready to leave the house, that he could drop it off for her.
Chris drops the insulin around 10:30 that morning. Jennifer and Chris receive a photo about 2 hours later, around 12:30, of Michael laying unconscious in the Cochran's kitchen floor.
Michael was laying in the fetal position in the floor in his kitchen.
So she sends a photo out of him on the floor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my reaction in the text was, is he okay? What's going on? He's fine. The contractors are here, putting him on the couch. Okay.
Michael is moved from the floor to the couch. People start coming into the home saying, hey, you should probably take him to the hospital.
Throughout the day, some of the couple's friends come to the house while others text Natalie, worried about Michael.
Every time we would check on him, we would get, he's fine.
He's going to sleep it off.
He's going to sleep, he's sleeping it off.
She said that he was sleeping it off on the couch.
The wording of the messages were as if she was communicating with him. He won't go to the hospital. Oh.
He won't go to the hospital?
Yes, when she says he won't go to the hospital. In my mind, I'm thinking that he's told her, I'm not going to go to the hospital.
Almost unilaterally, all of Natalie's friends were urging her to take Michael to the hospital, and Michael needed medical attention.
And so you're looking at close to 8 hours that this man, that he was incapacitated. He was unconscious, he was on the couch, and pretty much unresponsive.
I get a message at around 6:30. I'm at Gavin's basketball game. And the message says, can you come by after the game?
Chris Davis shows up and insists that they take Michael to the hospital, and they load Michael in the car.
I knew something was wrong. He's just totally unresponsive. I was like, well, I said, he's gotta go to the hospital.
He's been unconscious for 7-8 hours. Like, we're getting him to the hospital.
Michael got to the ER at Raleigh General Hospital. His blood glucose was at 21. He was critical, and he was intubated.
A blood glucose level of 21 would be extremely low, dangerously low, and basically result likely in some sort of massive cognitive dysfunction, coma, seizure, or even death.
Michael's parents are at home that night with no idea of their son's condition.
We came home from church, watched a little TV. I was in the bed. Eddie brought me my phone. He said, you got a text message from Natalie. It's 10:30 at night.
Concerned by such a late night text, Michael's mom, Donna, checks Natalie's message.
She sent me a picture. There's Michael Brandon in the bed, and he's on the ventilator, unconscious, unresponsive.
The Davises also received texts from Natalie showing Michael in the hospital.
I just kept asking her on text message, what happened? What happened?
Doctors determined that Michael is suffering from cerebral edema.
Cerebral edema is the medical term for swelling in the brain. We usually think about cerebral edema in the setting of a big bleed or a traumatic event.
Michael Brandon, he was fighting to breathe. He was trying his best to live.
Michael spends at least 4.5 days in a hospital in Charleston.
She makes this decision, she's going to take him off the ventilator and everything.
What are you thinking at that point, Jennifer?
I think there's total shock. I just remember thinking, this isn't happening. This can't be real.
Yeah,
like,
this was
so tragic.
What is this weird nightmare that just, my goodness.
That's visited upon this couple.
Yeah.
She's sick and now he's dying.
Like, those poor kids. My goodness. This is awful. It was awful.
For 5 days, he received medical treatment. He was in a coma, never regained consciousness, and passed away on February the 11th at the hospice house in Beckley.
Your friend, 38 years old, within days, is gone.
It was awful. It was tragic.
It's just sad, We went to the funeral. It just all seems surreal. Everything's just kind of like you're like in this fog, Just unimaginable.
After Mike had passed, Natalie called me one day and said that I've created this scholarship in his memory.
Natalie starts a scholarship called the Coach Michael Cochran Legacy Scholarship. It appeared that Natalie was selecting people who were family members. There were also people that Michael coached.
Tony McCall's son is one of those high school students that Natalie had offered a 4-year college scholarship to.
These scholarships, they're the kind that kids dream of.
Natalie, newly widowed, continues running her businesses. But then 4 months after her husband's death, she suddenly decides to sell nearly half of Tactical Solutions Group, for $4 million.
She had negotiated to sell that business with a buyer, offering to buy a 49% interest of her business. So this buyer had wired her $50,000 as an earnest deposit on his buy-in to this business.
But before the deal can go through, police show up at the Cochran home with a search warrant.
She said, oh, they came here and they took everything. When they raided her house that day in June, that was huge. I mean, it was all anyone could talk about.
When police search the Cochran home, they find something unexpected that could explain Michael's sudden death.
A man, 38 years old, what a fitness guru he was, to suddenly die in the midst of financial crimes occurring. I mean, that's pretty suspicious.
So they decide to exhume Michael Cochran's body. Does the big con turn into an even bigger crime?
At first, this was just a Ponzi scheme investigation.
Tonight, all eyes on the headline-making court case that just wrapped.
The interest in this case was huge.
Police are investigating the death of Michael Cochran.
To suddenly die in the midst of allegations of financial crimes, that's pretty suspicious.
So you think he was duped as well?
100% I believe that.
The defense counsel made it clear they were living this lavish lifestyle. So how couldn't he have known that this was a Ponzi scheme?
Natalie weaved such a web of lies, keeping us all drinking the Kool-Aid.
They open the fridge, they find the vial of insulin.
That was huge.
Did anybody take insulin in the house?
No. I said, insulin, what are you doing with the insulin in the refrigerator?
Prosecutors called that the murder weapon.
What keeps Gavin alive, she used to take life.
Just in shock. I'm still in shock.
The defense can say, maybe he died of something else.
I know that he took steroids and he took many other supplements.
He was a ticking bomb.
Your daughter-in-law is being accused of killing your son.
I mean, how do you kill somebody that you're supposed to love?
It's been 7 months since 38-year-old Michael Cochran's death, and Private Eye James Quisenberry sends an employee on an undercover mission to Michael's wife Natalie's garage.
I just seen the sign and figured I'd come out this way.
Oh.
She was selling a bunch of things and items at her house.
This is security camera cable, and then this is Ethernet cable.
He's there to secretly get a closer look.
The question was still out there of whether she was sitting on a pile of money, all these different questions.
You don't want to sell the rest of anything else?
Not really. I'm going to keep those for my son. My husband passed away, so my dad helped me go through it, and we kept things that my son might use when he grows up. So.
Okay.
Had there been something there that shouldn't have been there, would have turned it over to law enforcement. She's all smiles and looking at him and trying to be polite, and as soon as he turns his back, she changes her look, like her whole demeanor changes.
In the months since Michael Cochran's death, authorities have started to take a hard look at the Cochrans' so-called businesses.
I received a phone call from a trooper who had spoke with a local business person who had purchased some firearms from the Cochrans, and he had a problem with getting his firearms delivered or the money returned, and he was looking for help in resolving that matter. He had been solicited to be an investor in contracts. He never did it because the information he was receiving from Natalie Cochran on these investment solicitations didn't make sense to him.
I was like, yes, we definitely need to take a look at this.
So that disgruntled customer then connected investigators with someone who said he had invested with Natalie Cochran.
The problem that he was encountering was he kept getting excuse after excuse after excuse with getting his money returned.
Bob was going through the records as they were coming in, And so, there's a ton of information there to go through. And Bob's looking at it. We're sitting there one day, and he goes, "I'll be damned." He said, "It's a damn Ponzi scheme."
As they dig in, they take notice of the investigation into that Little League account. Remember, board members had been suspicious of Natalie after money had gone missing.
The Shady Spring Little League bank account is one of the many accounts she used to facilitate her Ponzi scheme.
Natalie would deposit from their company and then sift it back out in various different ways.
Natalie called the alleged financial crimes bogus, and ultimately authorities decided not to charge her with anything related to the Little League.
The league never recouped any money. It was all just lost.
It's late into the summer, and those generous Michael Cochran legacy scholarships, which Natalie had promised students, are now supposed to be paid out.
There were 8 people in total. They are full-ride scholarships for up to 8 years.
Tony McCall's son was given one of those college scholarships.
There was no money. It was a fake scholarship. Natalie weaved such a web of lies. They were bizarre like that. It was still keeping us all in the flock.
Natalie Cochran has insisted the scholarships would have been paid if her assets hadn't eventually been frozen by the government. But investigators had a different view.
When she created these, we saw that as an attempt to dispel rumors. Rumors were circulating that her business was being looked at, that she didn't have this wealth and this money.
We had pretty clearly identified at least, and I may be under at least 10 known victims of the Ponzi scheme.
The most obvious red flag at the time was that nobody was getting any money back.
We had more than enough evidence and documentation to proceed with indictment.
So she's arrested.
Yes.
What did you think of that?
We were glad.
When she was arrested, she was wearing the Tailgate Socialite t-shirt. That was the true Natalie right there.
Natalie Cochran faces 26 charges related to the fraud. She pleads not guilty, but her investors are deeply distraught over the hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost money.
I spent $256,000.
$511,000.
Almost $250,000 over the course of 2.5 years. We loved her and we believed her. Everything she told us, we believed everything she said to us.
Chris Davis says he too was taken in by his trust in Natalie and by the impressive paperwork she supplied. It looks legitimate. I mean, there are a lot of companies and there are a lot of entities here. Why would she do this?
I don't know if it was the greed or the position or status.
Reaching a deal with prosecutors, Natalie pled guilty to 2 counts, an unlawful monetary transaction and wire fraud.
And then she went off to prison for 11 years for fraud.
She did. May 1st of 2021 is when she finally went into the prison at Hazleton.
The court also ordered her to pay back $2.5 million to the investors she fleeced. But with little income coming in, it will likely be a very long process.
Did you feel that was fair, that was right?
The judge said, if I could give you more, I would. He acknowledged the fact that the lawyers had reached this plea agreement and had capped what he could have done to her. So no, at that moment, I didn't believe it was fair. And just as I told the judge, there's 2.5 million reasons why it wasn't fair.
But this isn't over yet. A search warrant in the fraud case had led investigators into the Cochran home and brought an unexpected surprise.
They open the fridge, they find the vial of insulin. It's suspicious that it shouldn't be there. Nobody in the family is diabetic.
Does that insulin have anything to do with Michael Cochran's death? We'll hear from his wife Natalie for the first time as investigators hit her with some tough questions.
We'll be having a conversation with Natalie Cochran.
This investigation is just getting started.
At first, this was just a Ponzi scheme investigation.
But as authorities investigate the fraud case, they also begin questioning Michael Cochran's unexpected death.
Michael Cochran, who was 38 years old, seemingly a fit, healthy man.
He took care of himself. He did work out all the time.
To suddenly die in the midst of allegations of financial crimes, that's pretty suspicious.
No autopsy had been done on Michael Cochran. The death certificate issued by the hospice where he died listed natural causes.
There was no medical examiner involvement.
Natalie Cochran gave different versions of what happened with Michael on February the 6th to multiple people.
So authorities arrange a meeting with Natalie.
Today's date is April 8th, 2019. I explained to her we were looking into Michael's death. Natalie, just tell me how things progressed with Michael.
February the 6th, whatever day we took him to the hospital. We could pick him, all of a sudden he started throwing up in the sink. And I heard him hit his head, and then I went in there and he had fallen. And so I didn't know what to do because Michael was very adamant after he got out of the hospital last time. He said, if you ever take me to the hospital again, you're going to be dead.
It turns out Michael had been hospitalized for several days back in November for potential exposure to black mold. Natalie says she thought one of his training supplements could have been making him sick.
It was her belief that Michael had taken an overdose of this supplement that she alleged was coming from Mexico.
I'd always been learning that this stuff's not safe. It even came in a bottle that said for animal use only, not for human ingestion. It's like syrup.
Right.
We're taking it to gain mass and to keep its belly cut up.
Gotcha.
And it also had an insulin component in it, but bodybuilders can manipulate insulin to cut muscle.
She introduces insulin in the discussion as part of Michael Cochran's weightlifting regimen.
Mike was all about, he was just very into body.
Is there any chance that he would have purposely taken too much of that?
He did purposely take too much, but he was trying to super load.
There was always this effort to make sure that there was an explanation for insulin being somehow involved in Michael's death. In the third conversation, she brought up that Michael was injecting with insulin. She had done a complete pivot from where it was all this supplement. Now Michael's injecting insulin. The insulin he was doing through injection.
Correct. He would inject it before meals so that it would cover any carbs that he ate.
Insulin is used primarily by diabetics to essentially help us regulate the blood sugar in our body.
He wasn't diabetic, obviously.
No.
And remember, the fraud investigation is still ongoing. In June of 2019, federal and state authorities conduct a search of the Cochran house.
Natalie is there.
She was in the garage. The search warrant was done based off the financial crime information investigation only.
We anticipated finding additional evidence regarding this Ponzi scheme.
But they found something else they didn't expect.
Sometimes things happen in investigations that you call it fate. I started rummaging through the refrigerator and there's this bottle of insulin sitting right there.
It shouldn't be there. Nobody in the family is diabetic.
That was huge. Where did it come from? Whose is it?
Natalie's got the same answer for authorities and for Michael's mother.
She said, oh, they came here and they took everything. And she said they even took the insulin out of the refrigerator.
Now, what did you make of that? Did anybody take insulin in the house?
No. I said, insulin, what are you doing with the insulin in the refrigerator? I keep that here, she said, for Gavin when he came over if he needed a shock, because he's a diabetic.
You believed it?
We did.
Remember, Gavin is Chris and Jennifer Davis's son. They tell authorities they never stored his insulin at the Cochran house. But then they recall the bag they left for Natalie the morning Michael collapsed.
The investigator said, did she ever borrow insulin from you? And that's when Jennifer was like, yeah, She needed it. She had cancer and she got sick. And that's when they were like, you know when? And I felt like at that moment, we both were like, oh my goodness. Because now we know that she's a thief and a fraud.
When we started seeing the text messages with Jennifer Davis about insulin, it was very revealing. If you believe the previous things that Natalie has said, she should have already had insulin readily available in the home. So it made no sense to go through all this effort. I think it's clear that she poisoned him with insulin.
Authorities develop a theory of how Natalie may have used insulin to kill Michael.
When he's finally taken to the emergency room, he presented with a blood sugar level of 21, and he's not diabetic.
You get low blood sugar by receiving too much insulin. Natalie had access to insulin. She had the means to inject it. She knew exactly what insulin would do.
Investigators believe there's enough circumstantial evidence to tie Natalie to Michael's death.
39-year-old Natalie Cochran is now accused of the February 2019 murder of her husband, Michael.
Natalie Cochran pleads not guilty. Was that hard for you to accept that your daughter-in-law is being accused of killing your son?
Yeah, it was really hard to believe because, I mean, how do you kill somebody that you're supposed to love and they're your children's father?
But why would Natalie want to kill her husband?
The investigators thought the text messages looked suspicious.
Michael didn't know about the Ponzi scheme, but he was learning.
Michael was about to discover he didn't have millions, perhaps $1 billion of legitimately earned income inbound from the federal government, and that was a problem for Natalie.
Here is exactly the motive of why she felt like she had to kill Michael.
Opening arguments began today in the Natalie Cochran trial.
In January, more than 3 years after she was indicted for the first-degree murder of her husband, Michael, Natalie Cochran's trial is finally underway.
There were media outlets from all over the country here. The interest in this case was huge.
You may be seated.
For Michael's family and friends, the 3-year wait for justice has been agonizing. How tough was that for you all to just have this thing drag on before it's going to be resolved?
It was hard.
Yes, very hard.
Spent lots of time praying.
What was it like for you to see Natalie in that courtroom?
I can't say that I really even thought about her. We just had to get justice for Michael.
Natalie Cochran is a young woman. An 11-year sentence with good time served for the Ponzi scheme is relatively short versus a life sentence for murder. Those stakes are incredibly high.
All right, now, Mr. Truman, you may proceed.
Thank you. On February the 5th of 2019, Michael Cochran was a 200-pound, healthy 38-year-old man. By midday of February 6th of 2019, he had lost consciousness and he would never regain consciousness.
The state needs to get ahead of the fact that it's an entirely circumstantial case. You got to tell the jury. You're not going to get the stuff you get on TV. There's no DNA, there's no fingerprints. This is it. But that's enough to convict.
This is a complex case, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, but it's built by the state of West Virginia on conjectures and innuendos, and glaringly lacking in motive and the evidence necessary to prove that my client killed her husband.
Natalie understood that we cannot present a defense that would somehow skirt the issue of the Ponzi scheme or that would hide it from the jury. We admitted to the jury what was well known to everybody.
The fact that she is perhaps a fraud and perhaps a cheat, and that you wouldn't perhaps want to invite her home for Sunday dinner, that you wouldn't like her, does not translate into being a murderer.
We absolutely believe that the imminent failure of the Ponzi scheme was Natalie's motive to kill Michael. That was going to happen, and it was going to happen very, very quickly if she didn't act.
What Michael Cochran didn't know is certainly one of the most important questions here. But to me, what's more important is what he was about to know, the consequences that would come when he found out that information.
And at the heart of the case, a vial of insulin. Prosecutors called that the murder weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What keeps Gavin alive, she used to kill. She used to take life.
On the morning of February 6th, Jennifer Davis remembers getting a text from Natalie asking to borrow that insulin. She testifies about that exchange.
Can you just explain to me what's going on in this conversation?
She said that her and Mike, they were both sick, and she had to start taking small insulin shots.
Did you provide that insulin to her?
I put the insulin in a bag and gave it to my husband, and he dropped it off on the porch on the way to work.
Several hours later, Natalie sends Jennifer a picture of Michael unconscious on the kitchen floor.
What did this picture mean to you when you received it?
Just that it was just shocking that he was laying there.
Natalie contacts 2 construction workers that had worked for the family, says, Michael's on the floor. I'm gonna need help picking him up from the floor and taking him into the living room.
So after Chris Davis drops off the bag of insulin, Natalie sends out a text. She invites several friends over throughout the day to check on his condition and essentially make sure he's okay, but not take him to the hospital.
In a statement to ABC News, Natalie Cochran says that, quote, Mike hated the hospital. He threatened several people that we better not take him back.
Stephanie Hamilton, a physician's assistant, came over to check Michael out and found him non-responsive.
What did you specifically notice?
That he needed to be checked. I said even people with the history of seizures, anytime they have one, they need to be checked. I kept offering, I would go with her. She said she was gonna let him sleep it off.
You also heard from her later today. Take a look at that. 21. What does that mean?
No one should ever have a blood sugar of 21.
What's gonna happen if they do?
They're in a coma. Probably near death.
At some point, you go over.
Yes, and I walk in the living room. He's laying on the couch like he's sleeping.
What did you do?
So I go over to him. I just remember saying, man, hey, buddy, I'm going to take you to the hospital. And that's exactly what I did.
But by this time, it's too late. Michael gets to the hospital, but the damage has been done.
Take a moment, you're okay.
Chris, it was very tough for you in court when they showed you the photo that you had already seen of Mike.
Yeah.
Why did it hit you so hard?
I wished I could have got to him first.
Over 2 days, prosecutors have meticulously laid out the timeline of the day Michael Cochran died. The question now, will they be able to prove that it was his wife, Natalie, who killed him?
Mr. Truman, you may call your first witness.
As prosecutors lay out their case against Natalie Cochran, they intend to show that she not only had the means, but the motive and the opportunity to kill her husband Michael back in February of 2019.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Robert Heinzman.
Raise your right hand, please, sir.
Bob Heinzman was the primary investigator of the defendant's Ponzi scheme, and he explained there was really no evidence that Michael knew what was going on.
Now, the defense has floated the theory that Michael Cochran was up to his eyeballs in this Ponzi scheme. From your investigation, do you have any evidence that would support that?
He believed that they had obtained contracts and that they would be receiving money for these contracts.
Do you have any evidence that he knew that this was a fraud being carried on?
No.
It was important to hammer home that Michael Cochran was at least cognizant of the scheme because it would destroy the state's theory of why it happened. Have you, in your thorough investigation of this case, talked to the children of Mr. and Mrs. Cochran?
No.
Would it surprise you if I told you that they observed their parents work on the federal contracts, and you're telling this jury that he had no knowledge of these contracts?
I'm not telling the jury that. I said that he knew about the contracts that he was led to believe were bid on by their business.
The investigation had revealed that Michael was beginning to ask some really tough questions of Natalie about where the money was going.
The day before, February 5th of 2019, it was arranged by the Cochrans to charter a flight from Beckley down to Lynchburg, Virginia to meet with the Bank of America banker. And of course, that was a meeting that Natalie could never allow to happen because if it did happen, then Michael would know, and that would have been the end of her Ponzi scheme.
Court Nexon was an employee of Bank of America. He testified via Zoom in this trial because he's not local.
And that was to take place February 6th of 2019, correct?
Correct. Looks like they said they were going to fly in, and so we were basically responding to their schedule and setting things up as best we could.
Did that meeting take place?
Never took place.
Natalie was becoming desperate at this point.
Prosecutors argue that if Michael was in the dark, Natalie's deception was about to come to light.
Putting Jennifer Davis on the stand explains how Natalie got the insulin that she needed to kill Michael.
Jennifer, at this point, you were offering to help out a friend in need. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Did she accept your offer of help?
Yes, she did. She asked if she could borrow a vial of insulin.
According to Dr. Uribe, who was one of our forensic pathologists, the only way that Michael's blood sugar could have plummeted to 21 was if someone else had given him insulin.
There was profound hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia is low blood glucose. Once he was treated for the hypoglycemia, the blood sugar went up and then it went back down again. To me, that is a significant pattern.
And why is that pattern significant to you?
Because there are only a few things that can do that. One of the big things is insulin administration.
But the defense poses an important question. Could Michael have injected himself as part of a bodybuilding regimen? Dr. Uribe pushes back against that suggestion.
To my knowledge, bodybuilders don't use insulin.
During the murder investigation, Michael's remains were exhumed, and Dr. Uribe conducted an autopsy.
And what did you determine were Michael Cochran's cause and manner of death?
I came to the conclusion that the cause of death was exogenous insulin administration.
Your Honor, the state calls Timothy Bledsoe to the stand.
Tim was able to draw all of the parallels and connect all of the pieces. He was able to explain for the jury how and why the Ponzi scheme and the failure of the Ponzi scheme led to the murder of Michael Cochran.
It was about telling that story, another piece to the puzzle. And I think overall, we were successful.
Now, we previously heard Jennifer Davis testify that she had insulin sent to the defendant's home. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Do you recall why the defendant needed the insulin that morning?
I believe it was something related to cancer treatment.
And throughout the entire course of your investigation, Did you ever uncover any evidence that the defendant had cancer?
No.
Did you waver at all? Did you wonder maybe the prosecutors had this wrong, that it was just a horrible set of circumstances?
Not once they talked to us. And then I started going back through, my text, and, Chris and I started talking, and then I was just in shock, disbelief. I was still in shock. It just doesn't seem real at all. But it was hard.
Prosecutors have rested their case. Now it's the defense's turn to persuade the jury that Natalie Cochran is innocent. And to do that, they bring in their own star witnesses, Michael and Natalie's children.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, Your Honor.
The state has wrapped its case of circumstantial evidence. Now it's the defense's turn.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
They believe there's not enough evidence to prove that Natalie Cochran killed her husband, Michael.
The atmosphere in the courtroom was, what's the defense going to bring? You could sense some anxiety there of what the defense was going to say about Michael to try and explain away Natalie's actions.
The defense has already told the jury that Michael Cochran was, quote, a ticking bomb because of his alleged medical problems and health history. Their game plan is to discredit the prosecution's case and Michael Cochran himself.
There was no forensic evidence to tie her to a murder. Zero forensic evidence.
They called two surprising witnesses to the stand, Natalie and Michael's children.
Would you state your name for the record?
Nicole Cochran.
What type of medication was he taking?
I know that he took steroids and he took many other supplements.
Did he do it daily?
Yes, every morning.
Was he into supplements and vitamins and all of that stuff?
Oh, absolutely. He took his supplements, his pre-workouts, and those things. He tried to take care of his body.
He would lay all of his pills out on the counter, and there would be so many of them that they would just sit in a whole circle, and it looked like the size of a dinner plate. And then he would scoop them handfuls at a time into his mouth.
The theory by the defense counsel is that Michael Cochran was not a healthy individual.
Did you start noticing changes in your father's health?
He was very agitated and angry, more so than not, and he was having a lot of headaches.
The defense asked the same line of questioning to the Cochran son, whose face is concealed on the witness stand because he's a minor.
Did he ever inject anything?
Definitely steroids.
He took supplements and things like that. Did he take steroids?
He never took any steroids. If you would see him, everything that he has, all the muscles he has, is natural, hard work.
Mike wasn't a bodybuilder. He ate too much pizza to be a bodybuilder. Was he fit? He was. Was he in shape? He was. Did he work hard for that? He did.
And he was taking things from Mexico, they were saying, things that were not approved by the FDA.
What did he get from Mexico? Do you know?
I don't know the name of the steroid, but it was definitely an anabolic.
What was that like to see them testifying on their mother's behalf?
They love their mother. Of course, they're going to defend their mother. But the things they said about their father was really heartbreaking.
Defense lawyers argue that Michael Cochran was not exactly a healthy 38-year-old and that his lifestyle led to 4 hospital visits between 2017 and the time of his death in 2019.
He got sick, and I feel like around that time is when you could just notice that he started to change a little bit, just forgetting stuff all the time. And he was more aggressive.
Towards whom? Aggressive?
Towards everybody.
Natalie had told friends and family that her husband also suffered from seizures, plus symptoms of black mold poisoning from renovations he did on their house. Oh, had you heard of him having seizures?
We were told that he had seizures, and he was exposed to black mold.
The defense also tries to hammer away at the state's motive, the Ponzi scheme. They claim Natalie Cochran wasn't the only one involved. They say Michael was too.
I always saw him working on his computer, and he would say that that's what he was doing,
Say that he was doing what?
that he was filling out contracts.
Did your mother do that?
No.
Who was working on the contracts?
My dad.
We had heard that Natalie Cochran was going to take the stand. She had informed the judge that she was going to testify in her own behalf. And at the last minute, she decided that she wasn't going to testify.
The jury was extremely attentive, but the jury was never more invested in what was being said than in the closing arguments.
All right, are you folks ready to deliver your closing remarks?
Natalie was a diabetic counselor and a pharmacist. She knew that injecting insulin into a non-diabetic would cause harm.
Is that the action of a planning cold-blooded killer? She would get that insulin ahead of time, not on the day of the murder, and involve two witnesses against her right there and then.
She chose over and over, after repeated pleas from friends and loved ones, to leave Michael on the couch.
It's a horrible tragedy, but a tragedy, not a murder.
The state failed to answer a couple of questions, and that is, when did it happen? Where did it happen? How did it happen?
There was no deductive reasoning where you would say, well, it was Professor Plum with the candlestick in the study.
Well, it was actually the pharmacist in the kitchen, according to the prosecution's theory.
She had a clear motive, and you saw that leading up to this date, Michael was about to find out what she was doing to people. Do we know what he was going to do with that information? We never will, because he won't have the chance to tell us.
Ms. Cochran is committed crimes of fraud, but that doesn't make her a murderer. We're asking you to find her not guilty.
21 was such a crucial number because nobody's blood glucose should be at that level unless you've had an injection of insulin.
A normal blood glucose level would be anywhere from 70 to around 130.
21. And that's the number we're going to rely on to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant killed Michael Cochran. Find this defendant guilty of first-degree murder, because that's exactly what she did.
The case is now in the hands of the jury. Were prosecutors able to convince them that Natalie Cochran killed her husband? Or did the defense poke enough holes to sow reasonable doubt?
People yell out, "There's a verdict," and then people start scurrying to get a seat inside the courtroom.
Has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, sir. When that verdict comes back, they were shocked.
The verdict, handed down just weeks ago, came quickly. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours.
Would the defendant please rise? The jury verdict is as follows. The defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree.
What was it like when you heard guilty?
We were so happy because we're finally getting justice for Michael after all these years.
You know, I could just feel my spirit and everything just went up. You know, this is what it's supposed to be.
It was exhilarating to hear the word guilty. And all I can think is we did it. We got her.
And the jury is not finished. They've got another decision to make, what's known as the mercy phase.
Good morning, members of the jury. Good morning. You are back.
Mercy, which means the defendant gets parole eligibility after serving 15 years, or no mercy, which means there's no eligibility for parole.
You'll raise your right hand, please.
A slew of Natalie Cochran's family, including her mom, tearfully take the stand.
I beg
I don't know what else I can say except please give mercy to her.
For a second time, Natalie's 19-year-old daughter faces the jury that's already convicted her mom in her father's murder.
I missed her at my high school graduation, and I missed her on the day I moved into college. I'm begging you to give her mercy so that I don't have to miss more.
Natalie Cochran's family ended up leaving when the family of Michael Cochran, when they were up there.
Raise your right hand, please, ma'am.
We, along with our family and friends, have sat quietly and graciously and painfully watched and listened as Michael's good name has been murdered time and time again.
It was one of the most intense pieces of testimony in the entire trial.
This spoiled, evil, narcissistic murderer had seldom, if ever, been denied this which she wanted. She will try to blame my precious son Michael for her evilness and deceit.
Do you remember what you said that you felt the strongest about?
When I said that please, please, don't give her any mercy, we ask that you please, please, no mercy. She never gave Michael any mercy.
I think it was extremely riveting for the jury to see.
We, the jury, unanimously do not recommend mercy.
Natalie Cochran will spend the rest of her life in prison.
But the pain lives on for Michael's friends, Jennifer and Chris, whose son's insulin may very well have been used to end their friend's life.
I trusted her, and that's the exact same thing she used and borrowed from me. And that's hard, and that's something I'll have to live with.
As far as I'm concerned, justice has been done. She's where she needs to be.
You've lost your son, you've lost financially, you've lost a lot.
Yes, we have, but we have each other and we're strong for each other. That's the only way we can get by, and because of God.
What about your grandchildren? Do you hope to have a relationship at some point with them?
Right now, I think it's best the way that it is. I don't see them coming around, and we have to accept it and just go on.
Just days after the verdict, I visited with Michael's parents. His stepfather, Ed, took me to a special place they've created to honor their son's memory. This is your memorial to Michael?
Yeah, not able to get up there to his gravesite much. So I said, well, keep it, right here close. Anytime we want to go, we can just come right here.
What do you think about when you come out here and sit on that bench?
When Donna and I, sometimes we kind of sit around down here. There'll be like a butterfly that'll come around. And I told Donna, I said, there's little Michael. So we've got a little cutout flower over there that he's always down here.
Such an emotional story to report on, David. Those heartbroken parents placing a memorial bench where they can always remember their son, Michael.
We should note tonight that Natalie Cochran does plan to appeal her murder conviction. In the meantime, that is our program for tonight. I'm David Muir.
And I'm Deborah Roberts. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.
It began on a quiet summer evening in June 2001 in the small Texas town of Marlow Creek, where the air smelled of dust and gasoline, and the sky turned blood orange before the night swallowed it whole. 19-year-old Claire Sutton never made it home from her shift at the diner that night. She'd told her best friend Megan she'd walk the 2 blocks to her house like she always did. But that walk, the one she'd made hundreds of times before, became the last trace anyone ever had of her. By dawn, her car was found abandoned near the railroad tracks. Doors unlocked, keys still dangling in the ignition. No signs of struggle, no fingerprints that didn't belong. Just silence, thick and endless, stretching across a town that didn't know how to breathe anymore. For days, volunteers combed the woods, the fields, even the drainage ditches by the old quarry. Dogs picked up her scent, then lost it by the water's edge. It was as if Claire had been swallowed by the earth itself. The sheriff's office launched an investigation that consumed the summer interview's search as roadblocks, but no trace emerged. A reward poster went up at the diner. The words, missing in red block letters, faded under the sun until they meant nothing. The town moved on slowly, uncomfortably, pretending that forgetting was a kind of healing. But it wasn't. Her parents never left Marlow Creek. Every Christmas, they still placed a candle in the window. Hope flickered where evidence had failed. 2 decades later, in 2021, a dusty file box was pulled from the back shelf of the county records room. A young detective named Erin McCall had just transferred from Austin, eager to make her mark. She opened the Sutton file not because she had to, but because the photograph clipped to the top a smiling girl in a diner uniform, hair tied back, eyes bright and trusting, refused to let her go. There were pages of old reports, dead leads, blurred Polaroids from a different era. But tucked inside the folder was a photo she didn't remember seeing before, a photo that shouldn't have been there. It was small, worn at the edges, showing Claire standing beside a man near a pickup truck. The man's face was partially obscured, turned away, but on the corner of the image, a faint reflection caught the flash, a silver bracelet engraved with initials Dr. McCall cross-checked the initials with the original witness list. Only one name matched: Daniel Rourke, Claire's neighbor and childhood friend. Back then, Rourke had been 23, a mechanic at his father's auto shop, and he'd told police he last saw Claire leaving the diner around 9:30 p.m. His alibi had never been questioned. He was local, reliable, and well-liked. Everyone said the same thing: Danny would never hurt her. But the photo suggested otherwise. If he'd been with Claire that night, why had he lied? McCall dug deeper. She pulled Rourke's old statement, matched the timeline, and found the first crack. He'd said he was home by 9:45. But the diner's surveillance log, though grainy and partial, showed Claire walking out at 9:47. Someone had doctored the time back then, or maybe no one cared enough to notice. The detective didn't tell her chief yet. She wanted to see the man herself. Rourke still lived in Marlow Creek, running a small repair shop off Highway 19, the same one his father had owned. When she arrived, he was under a lifted car, hands black with oil. He didn't recognize her badge at first, just smiled politely and wiped his palms on a rag. "Can I help you, ma'am?" McCall studied his face, aged, but calm, almost too calm. "You knew Claire Sutton," she said. The name froze him for half a breath. Then he nodded slowly. "Yeah, long time ago." His tone carried the weight of something unspoken. "We're reviewing her case," she said, placing the photo on the counter. He stared at it for a long time, the reflection of the bracelet barely visible in the faded light. "That was at the fair," he said finally. "Summer, before she disappeared." McCall leaned in. "Funny. The fair wasn't in town that year. It was canceled after the storm." The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath. Rourke's jaw tightened. He looked away, muttering something about customers waiting. McCall thanked him, but her instinct screamed that the man was hiding something. She sent the photo to the lab. Weeks passed before results came back. Fibers on the edge of the picture matched the kind used in early 2000s Polaroid film, confirming authenticity, and the reflection on the bracelet. It wasn't just a blur. Under magnification, a shape appeared, a silhouette of a pickup truck's door, and inside that reflection, another figure. Someone holding a camera. Whoever took that photo was standing closer than anyone realized. McCall traced Rourke's old vehicle records. In 2001, he owned a red Ford F-150, the same model visible in the reflection. She requested a warrant for the property, but before it could be processed, Rourke vanished. His shop closed, phone disconnected, truck gone. Word spread fast through Marlow Creek. The good old boy who'd fixed everyone's engines for 20 years was suddenly missing. Locals whispered his name at the grocery store, the gas station, the church. The sheriff's department called it routine questioning, but everyone knew better. The quiet town that had buried its past was being forced to exhume it. 2 days later, a call came from a rancher 30 miles south. He'd found an abandoned truck near a dried creek bed. McCall arrived before sunrise. The red Ford sat half buried in dust, windows shattered, driver's side door rusted open. Inside, under the seat, was a small tin box. Inside the box, a stack of photos, all taken in 2001. Claire smiling, Claire at the diner, Claire near the tracks, and in the last photo she wasn't smiling. her face blurred mid-motion as if startled. Behind her, that same pickup truck, and in the corner of the frame, the glint of a bracelet catching the flash. DR. By the time the forensics team arrived, the sun had climbed high enough to burn the mist off the creek bed, revealing the full decay of 20 years. The red Ford was a coffin of forgotten things, a relic of a man who had lived in plain sight while hiding the town's deepest wound. Detective McCall stood near the open-door notebook in hand, the metallic tang of rust and rot hanging in the air. Inside the glove compartment, a faded registration card confirmed what she already knew: Daniel Rourke. But it was the tin box that wouldn't leave her mind. She flipped through the photos again, each one stamped with the date June 18th, 01, the night Claire vanished. Someone had documented her final hours. Each photo was taken closer and closer, as if whoever held the camera had been following her. In one frame, Claire was crossing Main Street laughing. In the next, she was near the tracks. The last shot, the blurred one, captured a hand reaching toward her shoulder. McCall stared at that hand until the edges of her vision darkened. There was something familiar about it, the curve of a scar across the knuckle. She'd seen it in the photo at the repair shop, on Rourke's hand. She called it in. Within hours, the case that had been dormant for 2 decades was awake again. News crews arrived before the second patrol car. Texas, 2001. Cold case reopened. The headline flashed on every screen. But behind the frenzy, Marlow Creek held its breath. The sheriff's department began digging through the area where the truck was found. Beneath the cracked earth, they uncovered fragments, pieces of cloth, a rusted necklace clasp, and what appeared to be bone. The coroner confirmed the remains were human. The press swarmed. Could it be Claire Sutton, they asked, shoving microphones toward McCall. She said nothing. The bones were fragile, incomplete, and weathered beyond recognition. But tucked beneath the ribcage was something the years hadn't destroyed: a small silver pendant shaped like a heart. Claire's mother had described it in her original statement, a birthday gift engraved with the word hope. McCall watched as the pendant was lifted into the light. There was no mistaking it. The body was Claire's. 20 years of silence collapsed into a single moment. That night, McCall sat in her motel room, surrounded by files, photos, and the weight of the town's grief. Every note, every statement circled back to one man. But something about Rourke's disappearance didn't fit. If he'd killed her, why now? Why vanish after 2 decades of freedom, unless someone had forced him to? The photo, the bracelet, the missing truck, it all pointed toward guilt. But the precision, the way those photos were kept cataloged, preserved, it felt colder, more deliberate than the impulsive crime of a friend. Maybe Rourke hadn't been alone. McCall reopened the original witness statements one by one. She stopped on the name Megan O'Neill, Claire's best friend. At 19, she'd been interviewed once, said she'd last seen Claire leaving the diner and gone straight home. But her alibi had been supported only by her parents. In a small town, that was enough. McCall called her. Megan answered on the second ring voice, older but guarded. "It's been a long time," she said softly when McCall introduced herself. "You're digging up ghosts." "Some ghosts don't like to stay buried," McCall replied. There was a pause, the sound of breathing, then a quiet laugh. "Danny didn't do it," Megan said before McCall even asked. "He loved her. Everyone knows that." "Did he love her enough to lie?" McCall asked. Silence. Then Megan sighed. "Come by tomorrow. I've got something you should see." When McCall arrived at Megan's farmhouse the next morning, the air felt heavy storm rolling in from the west. Megan met her at the door with a box of old photo albums. Claire kept everything, she said. Inside were photos of dances, birthdays, nights at the diner. But in one photo, McCall noticed something strange. A mirror on the wall reflected 3 people, Claire, Megan, and someone standing behind them, camera in hand. Rourke, his expression unreadable. The timestamp on the photo was 2 hours before Claire disappeared. McCall asked if she could take it for analysis. Megan hesitated, then nodded. "You know," she said quietly, "I never believed she just walked home that night. I think she met him. I think she was planning to leave town." "With Rourke?" "No," Megan said, eyes darkening. "From him." That night, McCall sat in her car outside the farmhouse, replaying every word. If Claire had wanted to escape what had trapped her, She ran Rourke's phone records from 2001 sparse old data from a lost network, but one number appeared repeatedly in the final week O'Neill residence, Claire's best friend. The next morning, Megan was gone. Her car sat in the driveway door, open keys inside. On the porch, McCall found a note written in shaky pen. He wasn't supposed to find out. The storm hit at dawn. Roads flooded, phone lines went down, and Marlow Creek slipped into panic. Rourke's face was on every screen, now wanted for questioning, but no one knew where he was. Some said he'd left the state. Others whispered he'd come back to finish what he started. McCall didn't sleep. She spread the photos across the motel table like puzzle pieces. One detail caught her eye in the final blurred image of Claire. Behind her, near the pickup, a faint reflection shimmered in a puddle. 2 figures, not one. Someone else had been there. The outline was unmistakable. Long hair, a woman's silhouette. She magnified the image until the pixels bled together and her stomach tightened. The shape wasn't Claire's. It was Megan's. The best friend who'd called her to talk who'd vanished hours later. The realization hit like thunder outside the window. The case everyone thought belonged to one man had always belonged to 2. Claire had been running from both of them. Lightning cracked over the highway as McCall drove through the flooded back roads of Marlow Creek wipers, barely keeping pace with the storm. The motel TV had been looping the same broadcast for hours. Missing woman, Megan O'Neill. Connection to 2001 cold case under investigation. The town was unraveling again 2 decades after it thought the nightmare had ended. McCall's mind raced through the timeline. Claire disappears in 2001. Rourke lies about seeing her last. Megan defends him. And now both are missing within days of the case reopening. It wasn't coincidence. It was cleanup. Someone was erasing the past before the truth could surface. She parked near the O'Neill property, her flashlight slicing through the sheets of rain. The farmhouse door was still ajar, wind howling through the broken screen. Inside, the air reeked of damp wood and stale perfume. The kitchen table was littered with half-packed boxes, old bills, and a single photograph face down. McCall turned it over. It was Claire again, only this time she wasn't smiling. The edges were burnt corners curling like ash. On the back, in faint pencil, someone had written, "He wasn't alone." The detective scanned the room. Muddy footprints led to the back door smaller than Rourke's boot slider. A woman's shoes. McCall followed them out into the yard where the rain had turned the earth into sludge. The trail ended near the barn. The padlock hung broken, twisted by force. She pushed the door open, the beam of her flashlight trembling across the darkness. Inside, a single bulb flickered weakly, revealing a table covered with old film rolls, Polaroid frames, and negatives strung like a grotesque gallery. Faces of Claire, frozen in time, stared back at her from every corner. The prints weren't just keepsakes, they were evidence of surveillance. Years of it. McCall lifted one negative toward the light. It showed Claire at the diner parking lot, but behind her, in the shadows, another figure loomed. Not Rourke. It was unmistakably Megan. The same long hair, the same pendant she still wore in the interview photo from 2001. McCall's heart thudded. Megan hadn't just known what happened, she'd been there. She snapped pictures of the negatives with her phone and called dispatch. No signal. The storm had cut communication. Then from behind her, a noise soft, deliberate. A creak of floorboards. McCall spun around, gun drawn. Nothing. Just the hum of the bulb swaying overhead. She exhaled, lowering her weapon, and that's when she saw it. On the far wall, scrawled in black marker, half faded but still legible, "You can't bury what's already dead." She stepped closer. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. A drop of rain leaked through the roof, running down the letters like tears. McCall took photos, then followed a faint trail of muddy footprints out the side door. They led into the woods behind the barn. The rain muffled everything but her heartbeat. For nearly a mile, the path wound through twisted oaks before opening into a clearing, the old quarry, long dried and abandoned. She remembered it from the original file. Search teams had stopped there 20 years ago when the dogs lost the scent. Lightning illuminated the pit for an instant, and in that flash, McCall saw a shape. A person standing near the edge. She raised her light. Megan. The figure turned slowly. Her hair was plastered to her face, her clothes soaked through. In her hand, she held something a Polaroid camera, old and dented. "You shouldn't have come," Megan said. Her voice cracked, but carried over the storm. "You don't understand what she did." McCall kept her distance. "Then help me understand." Megan laughed, sharp and broken. "She wasn't innocent. None of us were. Danny tried to protect her, protect me, but she wouldn't stop." McCall's pulse quickened. "What happened that night?" Megan looked toward the dark pit. "She said she was leaving, said she'd tell everyone what we did. We followed her. I didn't mean for her to fall." The words hung in the air like thunder. "You were there," McCall said softly. "You both were." Megan nodded, trembling. Danny panicked. "He said we could fix it. He said no one would ever know if we just..." Her sentence died as headlights flared behind McCall. Tires screeched in the mud. The sound of a door slamming. McCall turned and saw him, Daniel Rourke, older, now soaked and wild-eyed, emerging from the rain with a shotgun in his hands. "Put it down," Danny McCall shouted. "It's over." He didn't listen. His gaze locked on Megan. "You told her," he hissed. "You said you'd keep your mouth shut." Megan stepped back, shaking her head. "I didn't, I swear." The gun wavered. McCall stepped between them. "You've been running for 20 years. Don't let it end like this." But his eyes were empty pupils wide-hollowed by years of guilt. "It ended the night she fell," he said quietly. "Everything after was just pretending." He looked at Megan one last time. "You shouldn't have taken the photos." Then he raised the gun. McCall lunged forward as thunder split the sky. The shot echoed across the quarry, a single violent crack swallowed by rain. For a moment there was only silence. When the light flickered again, Rourke was on the ground. The shotgun beside him, smoke rising from the barrel. Megan stood trembling, blood on her hands, eyes wide with shock. "He was going to kill me," she whispered. McCall radioed for backup voice, steady, despite the shaking in her limbs. The storm began to fade, leaving behind a stillness that felt unnatural, like the world had paused to listen. As dawn broke, deputies arrived. Rourke's body was taken away. Megan sat in the back of the cruiser, silent, staring out at the quarry. McCall watched her through the rain-specked window. For the first time, she realized the photo that had reopened the case, the one showing Claire with Rourke, might never have been taken by him. It had always been Megan's camera, and maybe from the start she'd wanted someone to find it. A silent confession buried under layers of fear and guilt. But as McCall stood at the edge of the pit where Claire had fallen, something still didn't add up. The Polaroid in the tin box, the one showing a second figure. The silhouette wasn't Megan's build. It was smaller, younger. Someone else had been there too. Someone neither of them had mentioned. Someone who still hadn't come forward. The case wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The rain had stopped by the time McCall returned to the station, but the air inside still felt thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had just unfolded. Rourke was dead. Megan was in custody, and the press was already calling it closure. Texas 2001 cold case solved, the headlines would say. But McCall couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. The details didn't align. The angle of the photo, the reflection, the height of that second silhouette, it didn't fit Megan or Rourke. Someone else had been there. Someone who had stayed hidden for 20 years watching the story unfold from the shadows. She locked herself in the evidence room, spreading the photos across the table once more. Every image of Claire's final hours stared back at her like a timeline, frozen in terror. She zoomed in on the last photo, the one taken near the tracks. Behind Claire's shoulder in the puddle's reflection, a second face barely visible, smaller, blurred, childlike. She enhanced the contrast, traced the outline, and froze. It wasn't a woman. It was a boy. A teenager, maybe 15 or 16. The revelation hit her like ice water. Rourke didn't have a brother, but Megan did. Ethan O'Neill. He'd been 17 in 2001. His name had appeared once in the original case files, barely a footnote. Questioned, briefly released, without follow-up. He'd left Marlow Creek right after Claire vanished, joined the Army, disappeared from the radar. Until now. McCall pulled his records. No recent address, no phone, but his discharge papers listed a P.O. box in Fort Worth. She called it in, requested a background check, and waited. Outside, the first reporters were already gathering at the sheriff's office door. Cameras flashed, questions flew. Detective, is it true? The suspect took his own life. Was Megan O'Neill involved? Is this case finally closed? McCall gave the same answer to all of them. Not yet. That night, she drove back to the motel, her head pounding with exhaustion. But as she opened the door, a thin envelope slid under the threshold. No address, no sender. Inside was a single Polaroid. Not from the 2001 batch, this one was fresh. It showed the quarry that morning, police tape fluttering in the wind, and McCall herself standing by the edge, staring down into the pit. On the back, scrawled in the same shaky handwriting she'd seen on the barn wall, were 3 words: "You missed something." McCall's pulse quickened. Someone was watching her. Someone who knew where she'd been, what she'd seen. She grabbed her gun and scanned the parking lot. Empty. Only the flicker of a broken neon sign reflected off the puddles. She drove straight to the forensics lab, photo in hand. The technician confirmed what she already suspected: the film stock was discontinued decades ago, same as the original Polaroids. Whoever sent it had access to the same kind of camera Megan used, maybe even the same one. McCall returned to evidence and checked the logged items from the farmhouse. The Polaroid camera was missing. Somewhere between the arrest and processing, it had vanished. She replayed the scene in her mind, the chaos, the rain, Megan crying, deputies shouting. Anyone could have taken it. But why send her the photo? Was it a threat? Or a clue? She stared again at the message. You missed something. Something about the quarry. She drove back before sunrise. The air was cold mist rising off the ground, the pit sealed off by yellow tape. She climbed down carefully, boots sliding on the mud. The smell of earth and decay lingered. Her flashlight cut through the fog until it caught on something half buried near the spot where Claire's pendant had been found. A small metal object glinted in the dirt. McCall crouched, brushing the soil away. It was another box, identical to the first, rusted and sealed with electrical tape. Her hands trembled as she peeled it open. Inside were more photos, dozens, maybe hundreds, but not of Claire this time. They were of people from the town, women mostly. Candid shots, leaving work, walking home, smiling at the diner, all taken from a distance. Some were dated before 2001, others after. The earliest read 1994. The latest was stamped 2020. This wasn't just about Claire. Someone had been documenting the lives and possibly deaths of women in Marlow Creek for decades, and Rourke wasn't the one behind the lens the whole time. There was a pattern here, a legacy. McCall drove straight to headquarters, her heart pounding. She laid the new box on the chief's desk. This isn't one killer, she said. It's a series, a cycle. The chief frowned. Aaron, the case is closed. We've got bodies, confessions, a suspect dead. The town needs this over. McCall slammed her hand on the table. You don't get it. Someone is still out there. Someone who's been watching all of us. Even me. Her phone buzzed before he could answer. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or we start again. Attached was another photo. McCall's motel door. Time stamped 2 minutes ago. She bolted out of the office, tires screeching down Main Street toward the motel. The parking lot was empty. Her room door stood open. Inside, everything was untouched except the wall above her bed. Someone had pinned another Polaroid there. The same shot of the quarry. Only now, in the reflection of the puddle, her own face stared back. McCall stood frozen in the motel doorway, rainwater dripping from her coat as her eyes locked on the photo pinned above the bed. The reflection in the puddle, her own face, wasn't just eerie. It was a message. Someone had taken that shot while she was at the quarry. Someone close enough to see her, to follow her movements, to anticipate her next step. The realization sent a cold shiver crawling up her spine. She ripped the photo off the wall, turned it over. Nothing written this time. Just a faint smudge of dirt at the corner. A fingerprint maybe too smeared to read. She slipped it into an evidence bag, her mind spinning. Whoever this was, they were taunting her, pulling her deeper into a story that refused to end. She checked the door, no sign of forced entry. The lock wasn't broken. Whoever had been inside had used a key. McCall's pulse quickened. Only the motel staff and law enforcement had copies. She stepped back, scanning the shadows of the room, the faint hum of the air conditioner masking her breathing. Then she saw it on the nightstand next to the lamp. A folded note, damp from condensation, scrawled in the same handwriting as before. It was never about her. McCall read it twice, her hands tightening. If it wasn't about Claire, then what was it about? She looked again at the wall where the photo had been pinned, noticing faint scratches in the paint beneath it. Not random marks, but letters carved hastily. Room 12. Her room was 14, 2 doors down. She drew her gun and moved quietly into the hallway. The building was silent except for the steady drip of water from a leaking pipe. Room 12's door was cracked open. She pushed it slowly, the hinges whining like a whisper. Inside, the air was heavy metallic. A faint buzz came from the television, frozen on static. And on the bed, another Polaroid camera aimed at the door as if waiting for her. Beside it lay a manila folder stamped with the sheriff's seal. She opened it. Inside were copies of reports from 2001, but not from the public record. These were internal memos, investigation notes that never made it to the file. Her name wasn't on them, but another one was Deputy Travis Heller. He'd been lead investigator before the case went cold. Retired in 2003, still lived in town, and in the corner of one memo written in pencil was a phrase underlined twice. Keep her quiet. McCall flipped through the rest, every page heavier than the last. Heller had been the one to clear Rourke. He'd suppressed Megan's inconsistencies. He'd closed the file when the pressure got too high, and now 20 years later, someone was cleaning up his mistakes or continuing his work. A sound came from the bathroom, a soft tap, tap, tap. McCall raised her weapon, approached slowly, heart pounding in her ears. She pushed the door open with her foot. The room was dark except for a single flickering bulb. Hanging from the shower rod was a row of Polaroids clipped by string. Each one showed a different woman. Claire, Megan, others she didn't recognize. And at the very end of the line, a fresh one, McCall herself standing in the quarry, flashlight in hand. The photo hadn't been there an hour ago. Someone had developed it and hung it up in the time it took her to drive from headquarters. She backed out of the bathroom, her breathing shallow. The camera on the bed clicked. A flash exploded in the dark. She spun around, gun raised, but the room was empty. Only the faint smell of developing chemicals lingered in the air. Whoever was playing this game knew her every move. She grabbed the folder, ran out into the rain, and drove to the only place that made sense, Heller's house. His porch light was off, curtains drawn. She knocked once, then twice. No answer. She circled to the back, found the screen door unlatched. Inside the house smelled of dust and old bourbon. The living room walls were lined with framed newspaper clippings, local deputy leads, search for missing girl Marlowe Creek, mourns teen disappearance. In each photo, Heller smiled proudly beside his team. But one frame sat empty, the glass cracked. McCall moved closer, noticing faint outlines on the wall where other frames had been. Someone had removed them recently. She followed the trail into his office. The door was half closed, a low humming sound coming from within. She pushed it open and froze. The walls were covered with Polaroids, hundreds of them pinned in rows like a gallery of ghosts. Women. Always women. Some from decades ago, others more recent. And in the center, under a single lamp, was a chair. A man sat slumped in it, eyes open but lifeless, a gun on the floor beside his hand. Travis Heller. On the desk in front of him, a single envelope marked for Aaron McCall. She stepped forward, cautiously, heart hammering, and picked it up. Inside was a letter handwritten in shaky ink. I did what I could to keep it quiet. They made me. It didn't start with Claire. It started before her. There's another box under the bridge you'll know where. Don't trust anyone in uniform. McCall's stomach twisted. She checked the gun beside him, cold, clean, staged. No blood spatter. Whoever had done this wanted it to look like suicide. She turned as headlights swept across the living room windows. 2 police cruisers pulled into the driveway. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number again. You should have stayed out of it. She slipped the letter into her pocket back toward the back door and disappeared into the dark before the other officers entered. As she ran through the rain, the words under the bridge echoed in her mind. There was only one bridge in Marlow Creek, the old iron one over Dry Hollow. And if the letter was right, the case wasn't solved. It had just peeled back another layer. The real story was still buried beneath the town's surface, and someone powerful was determined to keep it there. The night bled into the early hours of morning as McCall drove toward Dry Hollow Bridge, headlights cutting through the fog like a blade. The rain had stopped, but the sky still churned with clouds that looked heavy enough to break again. Her hands gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles burned white. Heller's words replayed in her mind under the bridge. The man had known something worth dying for, or being silenced for. The county road was deserted. Not even the hum of crickets dared to break the stillness. Marlow Creek was asleep, oblivious to the war still being fought in its shadows. When the old iron bridge came into view, McCall killed the engine and stepped out. The air was cold and thick with the smell of wet earth. The metal trusses groaned under the weight of the wind as she crossed slowly, flashlight sweeping along the railing, the asphalt, the gaps between boards. There, beneath one of the beams, she saw it a patch of fresh dirt among decades of dust and moss. Kneeling, she brushed the surface away with her gloved hands until something solid clinked against her fingertips. Another box. Smaller this time, sealed with duct tape edges rusted. Her heartbeat slowed into a dull, steady drum. She cut it open with her knife and found a stack of photos, but not the kind she expected. These weren't of victims, they were of police. Heller, deputies, detectives, and herself. Each one dated and labeled in neat handwriting, the earliest from 1993, the most recent from 2 nights ago. Every investigator who had touched the Claire Sutton case was here, cataloged, watched, tracked. Someone inside the system had been pulling the strings for decades. McCall lifted the last photo. It showed Heller standing beside a younger man in uniform, a man she recognized instantly. Sheriff Don Keller, her current boss. A wave of nausea hit her. Keller had been a deputy back in 2001, one of the first responders to the scene. He'd been there when the evidence went missing, when the file went cold. And now, he was the one trying to shut her down. The hum of an engine echoed in the distance. Headlights swept the bridge from the opposite side. McCall killed her flashlight, crouching low behind the railing. A black SUV rolled to a stop, its lights dimmed. The driver stepped out, broad-shouldered, calm, moving like someone who'd done this before. Sheriff Keller. He looked younger in the glow of the taillights, his badge gleaming against the dark. "You really should have listened," he said, voice low, steady. "I told Heller to keep you out of it." McCall rose slowly, gun in hand. "You killed him." Keller shook his head. "No, he did that himself the moment he stopped following orders. We built this department on silence, Detective. You think you're the first one who tried to dig?" He took a step closer. "Claire wasn't supposed to die. She saw something she shouldn't have. Megan and Rourke panicked, and we made sure it ended quietly. For the town's sake." McCall's breath came out sharp white in the cold. "You covered it up. I protected people," Keller snapped. "You think anyone here wanted the truth? Marlow Creek survives on pretending bad things happened somewhere else." He smiled faintly. "Until you showed up." McCall aimed higher. "You've been watching me." Keller gestured to the bridge. "You left me no choice. I didn't want this to get ugly." His eyes softened, almost paternal. "Put the gun down, Aaron. We'll fix this, just like before." The headlights flickered behind him, and for a second she saw movement, another figure stepping out from the passenger side. A flash of a camera, a click. Then the flash went off, bright and blinding. McCall stumbled back. Keller moved faster than she expected, grabbing her wrist, twisting the gun away. It skittered across the asphalt and disappeared over the edge. They struggled, his weight pressing her against the railing. "You could have been one of us," he growled. "You still can." She shoved back, elbow connecting with his jaw. He staggered. The camera flashed again, capturing the moment like a crime scene painting itself in real time. McCall lunged for the railing, found her footing, grabbed the discarded flashlight, and swung hard. The metal cracked against his temple. Keller dropped groaning blood dripping down his cheek. The second figure, a man, stepped closer now, still holding the camera. McCall blinked through the glare, trying to focus. He was young, maybe 30, clean-cut, wearing a deputy's uniform. She recognized him. Officer Ray Porter, the same rookie who'd escorted Megan the night of Rourke's death. The same one who'd handled the motel evidence log. "He said you'd come here," Porter said quietly. "He said you'd never stop. You're part of this," McCall spat. He didn't answer. He raised the camera again, took one last photo. "They'll say you shot him," he said, nodding to Keller's unconscious body. "They'll find your fingerprints on the gun, your prints on every piece of evidence you stole. You'll be the obsessed outsider who lost control." McCall's pulse roared in her ears. "You planned this." Porter's eyes flickered with something, regret, maybe, or pride. "We've been planning it since before you arrived." Another flash. She lunged forward before he could reload the film, tackling him to the ground. The camera cracked beneath their weight, film scattering across the bridge. Keller groaned somewhere behind them. McCall grabbed Porter's sidearm, aimed, and fired once into the air. The echo ripped through the hollow valley. Porter froze. "This ends now," she said. "No more photos. No more ghosts." The distant sound of sirens pierced the night, growing louder by the second. Backup. Maybe the last thing she'd ever trust again. Keller stirred blood on his face, whispering through gritted teeth, "You think they're coming for you. They're coming for me." McCall stepped back, gun still raised, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Porter looked at her, not with fear, but with something colder. "You can't stop a story, detective," he said softly. "You can only become part of it." The sirens reached the bridge as McCall backed into the fog. She didn't wait to see the lights. She ran. Into the woods. Into the dark. The Polaroid film fluttered in the wind behind her like feathers, each frame developing slowly in the rain, her face, Keller's, Porter's, the story still being written frame by someone unseen. McCall ran until her lungs burned the wood, swallowing her whole. Branches tore at her coat, mud splashed against her legs, but she didn't stop. Behind her, the sirens faded into a single distorted echo, swallowed by the Texas night. Somewhere on that bridge lay a sheriff bleeding a deputy with a broken camera and enough falsified evidence to erase her entire career. The moment she crossed that guardrail, Erin McCall had become the villain of her own investigation. She stumbled into a clearing, rain-soaked and trembling, checking the magazine of the gun she'd taken from Porter. 3 bullets, no radio, no car. The forest stretched for miles, and at its edge lay the same town that had turned corruption into a ritual. She needed to disappear, at least for now. She reached an old ranger cabin she'd seen on the map earlier, half buried under vines. The lock was gone, the hinges rusted. Inside, dust floated like ash in her flashlight beam. She collapsed against the wall, forcing herself to breathe. On the table lay a small box of matches, a thermos, and something that didn't belong, a Polaroid photo, freshly printed, still damp. It showed her standing on the bridge, gun raised, Keller on the ground. Below, in neat handwriting, "Officer down, suspect armed." She stared at it in disbelief. The image was perfect. Whoever had taken it had been behind her close enough to capture the moment before she swung. There hadn't been time for anyone else to get there. Unless the photos weren't being taken live. Unless they'd been planned, developed in advance. Her phone buzzed once, no caller ID, just a text. "Turn yourself in, Erin. It's over." She deleted it instantly. It wasn't over. Not until she knew who had been pulling the strings since 2001. She spread the photos she'd taken from the bridge box across the table, studying the pattern. Keller, Heller, Porter, all connected through the same case. But in the earliest shots, one detail stood out, an old sheriff's badge on a man she didn't recognize. The name barely legible in the corner, Sheriff Miles Kavanaugh, retired in 1994. The year the first surveillance photos were dated. The beginning of everything. McCall's fingers shook as she searched her memory. She'd seen the name once before on a commendation plaque hanging in the hallway of the sheriff's office. The same hallway she walked past every morning. If Kavanaugh had started this, Keller had inherited it. And now Porter was the heir. A chain of control. A legacy of silence. She stuffed the photos into her jacket and moved toward the window. The forest outside was black silent. until a light appeared in the distance, a flashlight beam steady, deliberate. Someone was tracking her. She killed her light heart pounding and ducked behind the door. The footsteps came closer, boots on wet soil. 2 voices, low and steady. Male, law enforcement cadence. Sheriff wants her alive, one said. No loose ends, the other replied. McCall clenched her jaw. They'd already rewritten the story, an officer gone rogue, armed and dangerous, responsible for the sheriff's shooting. She waited for the steps to reach the porch, then smashed the lantern off the wall. The sudden burst of flame blinded them just long enough for her to move. She slipped out the back, sprinting through the trees as gunfire cracked behind her. Bullets tore through the branches, splinters slicing her arms. She hit the ground hard-rolled and crawled toward the ridge. A fallen tree blocked her path. She ducked behind it, held her breath. The voices grew louder. She won't get far, one said. She doesn't know what she's walking into. They passed within 10 feet of her. One man's radio hissed with static. Through the distortion, a voice came through Keller's. Alive. Porter's dead, he said flatly. Find McCall. Bring me the camera. McCall closed her eyes. Porter, the last link in the chain, the one who'd started talking. The shot she fired on the bridge, had it hit him, or had Keller finished the job himself? The men disappeared into the trees. McCall waited until their voices were gone before climbing the ridge. At the top, she saw the faint orange glow of town lights miles away. Between her and safety lay the endless dark of the valley, and beneath it the hollow that had hidden so many secrets. Dry Hollow wasn't just a name, it was a graveyard. She made her way toward an old service road, found an abandoned gas station half swallowed by weeds, and ducked inside. The power was out, but in the glow of her flashlight she saw graffiti on the wall. Old, faded words, Sutton lives. Her stomach turned. The message couldn't be new. Claire Sutton was dead. DNA had confirmed it. The pendant. The bones. Unless the test had been wrong. Or manipulated. She sat down, her thoughts unraveling faster than she could contain them. The cover-up hadn't been about hiding a murder. It had been about hiding who was murdered. Maybe the remains weren't Claire's. Maybe someone had switched the evidence to bury something bigger. She took out her last remaining Polaroid, the first one that started it all. Claire and Rourke beside the pickup truck, his bracelet gleaming in the flash. She turned it sideways, squinting. In the background, faint and easy to miss, was a reflection in the diner's window. A third figure standing by the curb. The face too small to see clearly, but the posture unmistakable, broad shoulders, uniform badge glinting. Sheriff Keller. He'd been there that night, watching, waiting. And for 20 years he'd built a wall of silence around his own guilt. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. You should have left her where she was. Attached a live photo of her taken seconds ago through the station's broken window. She turned slowly. Outside, a figure stood in the dark holding a camera. A flash lit up the night. Then nothing. McCall dove to the floor, heart pounding, glass shattering around her. She crawled toward the back door, every breath a countdown. The flash went off again, closer this time. She ran. Through the fields, through the fog, into the night. Behind her, the shutter clicked over and over like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Each photo capturing her, freezing her in time, turning her from hunter to ghost. Somewhere in a dark room she'd never find, her story was already developing. She ran until the fog thinned and the fields opened like a blank page, the horizon, a bruise of violet bruising into dawn, and every step sounded like a shutter snapping shut behind her. The night developing her into evidence she couldn't outrun. Marlow Creek lay distant and lit like a stage where the same old players traded lines about justice, while the real scene happened in the wings, so she cut left across the drainage ditch, slid under a sagging fence, and kept low until the road bent toward the county line where an out-of-service way station squatted in weeds and silence, and the ghosts of flat tires. Inside, among cracked tiles and a breath of mold, she found a payphone that had outlived its purpose, and she breathed twice, forced calm into her hands, and dialed a number only rangers shared off paper, the kind of number that meant no local favors and no hometown myths. And on the fourth ring, a voice like gravel said Knox, and she said, "Detective Aaron McCall, Unofficially, Sheriff Keller is staging me for attempted murder. A deputy named Porter is either dead or being rewritten, and a retired badge named Kavanaugh is the skeleton key. I need custody before the story eats me alive, and Ranger Avery Knox said nothing for 3 seconds that felt like a dropped elevator. Then meet me where trucks sleep, and the line died like a witness who decided there was no more to say. She cracked the handset against the base and listened for movement, and when none came, she stepped back into the gray light. Certain the camera would be waiting somewhere, the lens already tasting the air for her name. But the field was empty except for the static hum of faraway power lines and the long road to decisions that could not be recalled. She took the farm track north boots, sucking at the mud, keeping the tree line on her right like a reluctant companion, then crossed a culvert and crawled the final stretch to a cinder block building with a corrugated tin roof sunburned by 2 decades of summers. A truck yard beyond it slept under sagging tarps and chains as thick as wrists, and she tucked herself behind a stack of pallets until a dusty Silverado ghosted in with its lights off, and a man with a Ranger's star on a plain leather belt stepped out. Without theatrics, looked at her without curiosity, and said, "You look like a headline waiting to happen," and she said, "Cold case, small town, big lie." And he nodded, because the shape of it was familiar and tragic, and older than either of them. Then motioned her inside. The office smelled like oil and secrets, and when he closed the door, he didn't ask for her badge, her gun, or her soul, just said, "Start at the beginning that matters." So she did. From the Polaroids to the tin box by the creek, the bracelet in the flash, the missing camera, the motel door, the bathroom clothesline of the dead Heller staged like a confession too neat to be true, the bridge where Keller's voice tried to sound like mercy, and Porter's camera tried to sound like history, and the old name that kept ringing Miles Kavanaugh Sheriff before the first surveillance shot ever clicked. Knox listened the way good men do when they are deciding which lie to kill first, then slid a legal pad toward her, with a date scrawled at the top, June 18, 2001, and beneath it, evidence transfer. Coroner Dr. Emil Vargas resigned 2002 Deputy Signature D. Keller. "Those logs were sealed years ago," he said. "I requested copies after your call. A ranger can still pry open a few doors." Keller forgot to nail shut. He unfolded a photocopy and placed it between them, a chain of custody line item for remains recovered near the quarry, and a note in the margin that did not belong in any clean archive, dental records deferred, confirm pendant identification. "They never matched teeth," Knox said flatly. "They matched hope." The word hung in the stale air and punctured something that had kept her standing. She saw the pendant again, the small heart with hope curled inside, and realized the town had let the word do the work of the science. Because grief wants a period, not a comma. If the bones weren't Claire's, she said slow and careful, like disarming a memory, then Claire either walked away, was moved, or was turned into an idea no one would look for, and Knox said, or all three. A missing girl is a story. A dead girl is inventory, and an unidentified girl is a problem someone expensive has to solve. And he slid over a second page. Unidentified female. 1999 partial remains stored. Marlow Creek. Evidence locker. A. The signature at the bottom was Miles Kavanaugh's. The ink faded to the color of old sins. He held a Jane Doe for 2 years. Knox had then signed her out the week after Claire vanished. No record of resubmission paper trail ends there, and something cold moved under McCall's skin because the hole in the ground had not buried one girl. It had buried 2 stories, 1 name and 1 body, and the swap had closed the lid on both. She felt the camera's phantom flash against the back of her neck and said, "Keller inherits the kingdom from Kavanaugh. Keep her quiet becomes policy. The Polaroids become currency. Megan and Rourke do panic, but the cover, the escalation, the ritual that's bigger. Someone was photographing the town's women years before Claire and Knox said, 'Show me what's missing.' So she spread her scavenged images across an oily desk, faces in corners, reflections in glass. The diner's window catching more truth than the witnesses ever gave, and at the edge of one frame he tapped a thumb, an almost invisible rectangle in the diner's far wall. Darkroom poster. He said class of '99 yearbook club, Old High School still keeps its basement, and the word darkroom unlocked a corridor in her head, where Fixer burned the throat and red bulbs made monsters of boys with cameras and girls with secrets. They moved fast after that Ranger Pace truck gliding into town, along back arteries that didn't bother with streetlights parking 2 blocks shy of the vacant high school, whose brick had lost its shine, but not its allegiance to the past. A hinge screamed once and then remembered itself, and they slid down a stairwell that smelled of water and old paper light knifing ahead in narrow slices until the door with the warped glass appeared, and Knox palmed it open with a patience that said he'd made a habit of not dying in rooms like this. The dark room was a shrine to stop time enlarger asleep at center stage trays, stacked like abandoned boats, the air still carrying a metallic tang of Fixer that had married the paint long ago, and along the far wall cabinets with locks as decorative as promises. Knox's pocket tool kissed one soft its side, and inside sat boxes labeled in a hand she recognized from the barn wall, and the motel note jagged rushed half-ashamed Sutton O'Neill, Creek women, and a final colder box marked witness. They did not speak until the negatives lay like veins across the light table. She fed one into the carrier, flipped the lamp, and the image rose from the paper like a resurrection that had been waiting for a name Claire in the diner lot, not smiling Rourke. Just outside the frame, Megan's reflection doubling in glass, and farther back in the window's deeper layer the shape of a uniformed man turning toward the camera badge catching a distant neon that spelled ICE from police, the coin of authority minted as alibi. She dialed through frame after frame and found repetition practice shots. Rehearsals of surveillance, the itch of someone learning a town by its shadows, and then a sequence dated the night itself. Claire walking Claire, stopping Claire looking past the lens toward something louder than the shutter. Then a car nose easing into view. Not Rourke's red Ford, but a black Caprice favored by county units from before Keller's budget let him buy SUVs, and in its windshield a silhouette that fit the retired sheriff like a verdict. Kavanaugh had been on scene before there was a scene to be on. Knox's jaw tightened inches at a time. This never went to evidence, he said, because evidence with a badge in it becomes a civil war, and she found the witness box because the room had gone too quiet not to tempt it, and inside were 3 letters that did not breathe well in the dark, each addressed, but never mailed, each thick with the reek of choosing between self and town, one from Megan, folding on itself with apologies and fear. One from Travis Heller stammering across 3 pages toward a confession he didn't yet have words for, and one signed CO, short for Claire O'Neill. No, the ink corrected her. Claire Sutton, the lines spare resolute, a girl trying to write herself out of a trap. I have photos. He said the camera would keep me safe. If anything happens to me, find the dark room. The truth is in the glass, not the mouths. The sentence cut like wire and left heat behind. He McCall whispered, and the pronoun found its shape as the pattern completed a mentor's promise. In a small town, where every door opens to the same porch. Kavanaugh had told a girl a camera could save her, because it had saved him, and Keller had inherited the lie, and Porter had learned the steps, and the town had clapped along because the music was familiar. They bagged what they could bag with 2 hands and a conscience, then split the evidence insurance against a future that would not negotiate Knox taking the letters and chain of custody copies, McCall taking the negatives that could survive a fire and still accuse, and when they stepped back into the hallway, the red emergency bulb stuttered once like a nervous witness and died, and the far door exhaled a draft that smelled of wet wool and old tobacco, the kind Heller had favored when he was still a man, instead of a message. We're not alone, Knox said. And the quiet agreed, and then the lens flare she had come to recognize bloomed and died straight ahead, a flash with no thunder, just the little click of a private history adding another square to itself. She moved low. Knox moved wide, and the beam of a second flashlight swung too fast and chased a ghost it didn't know it had created, and when the bulb washed to the far landing, she saw a figure in a hood pivot and absurdly protect the camera with both hands like a baby, then lunge sideways toward the boiler room stairs. Stop! Knox shouted with a ranger's authority, and the footfalls answered with fear and practice, and by the time they hit the corner the stairwell was already arguing with itself echoes, fighting over which direction the truth preferred, and all they caught was the final smear of a shadow escaping into the undercrawl where pipes sweated and time did not care. They listened, they failed to hear, and then the building spoke in its oldest voice, the metallic clunk of a service hatch locking from the outside, and the next sound was their own breathing. When they reached daylight, the campus had acquired witnesses it didn't deserve two silhouettes across the parking lot by the field house, one holding up a phone as if deputized by content, the other pointing toward their truck like a tour guide to scandal, and then McCall's phone vibrated against the ribs she had forgotten to protect, and the message bloomed like a bruise. You keep looking at the frame. I keep writing the caption. Detective turns vigilante ranger aides. Fugitive cold case explodes. Attached a fresh Polaroid of her and Knox silhouetted in the darkroom doorway. Their bodies reduced to shapes easy for the town to fear. They want us on the news before we're on the record, Knox said. And she felt the trap like barbed wire around the story's throat. Then we publish first, she said. And the words surprised her because they tasted like a different weapon. Not a press conference Keller could strangle, not a sworn statement he could bury, but a release to eyes that didn't owe him loyalty, the kind of light that bleaches old stains. State Lab Dallas Knox said secure locker independent chain, and he tossed her the keys, and as the engine shook itself awake, the highway opened like a bluff she would either survive or become part of, and she pressed the accelerator because momentum was the only map they had left. At mile marker 73, the world remembered it was Texas and gave them a truck stop with coffee whose ambition outran its flavor, and a bathroom mirror that told her she looked like the suspect on a poster, and, above the condiment rack, a TV looped local news with a crawl that chewed names into pulp. Marlow Creek Sheriff Stable deputy deceased outside detective, sought for questioning. Community demands answers, and the anchor used a tone reserved for storms and heroes and didn't yet know which this was. And then the feed cut to a man in a suit under county courthouse pillars, Keller's public information deputy, reading a statement that sounded like a first draft of history. Rogue outsider tragic scuffle decades. Old wounds freshly salted. She turned the screen off with her palm because rage makes fingers brave, and when she sat again, Knox had the negative spread as far as a booth would allow, his head bent toward a strip she hadn't studied, a night shot of the Iron Bridge. Older by 2 years than anything from 2001, and in it a parked Caprice, a cluster of uniforms and a girl's silhouette by the railing too small to be Claire, too soon to be any of the names in her file, and a date burned into the margin, June 19th, 1999. Below it, in that same jagged hand, one caption that remapped the entire case first rehearsal. She stared at the words until they behaved like letters again and not a curse, and the coffee steamed and the station buzzed, and somewhere outside a camera found them through the glass and clicked, and she thought, this town never had a cold case. It had a template, and the name Miles Kavanaugh moved from background hum to siren, a curriculum passed down like a family business, the Polaroid ritual, not just compulsion, but training. Keller had not invented the silence, he had just inherited the camera. She felt something break. Not in her, but in the story, a seam, giving way, a binding popping loose. And she knew what part 2 of their war had to be, find the coroner who resigned in 2002 and never gave interviews, Dr. Emil Vargas, the man who had allowed a pendant to speak for a skull. Knox looked at her and nodded, because he was already there, phone open to a private directory that smelled like favors, and even before he said the city, McCall saw the freeway sign in her head, San Antonio, and the morning tensed like a bowstring. As they pulled out, her phone buzzed once more, one final offering from the photographer who believed ink could outrun light, a Polaroid of a woman's hand wearing a silver bracelet engraved DR fingers resting on a steering wheel. The shot framed by the reflection of a badge in the windshield and beneath a caption written for her alone. She didn't fall, she was escorted. They reached San Antonio as the sun lifted behind a haze that turned the freeway into a ribbon of nickel. The truck moving like a quiet decision no one had the courage to interrupt, and every mile felt like the camera's breath on the back of McCall's neck, each overpass a lid sliding shut. Knox drove without conversation, Ranger hands steady on the wheel, and she stared at the Polaroid in her lap. The bracelet with DR, the badge reflected in the windshield. The caption that changed gravity, and she heard the words again, not as threat, but as choreography. She didn't fall. She was escorted. The medical examiner's building sat in a brick compound tucked behind a hospital, the kind of place built to be overlooked. Its windows narrow its stories, not designed for daylight. Vargas answered their buzz, himself thinner than the file photo's gray threaded through a beard that looked like it had grown during a long apology. Eyes quick, the way a man's get when he has outlived too many of his own choices. He said their names like he had been rehearsing them. He said inside and locked the door behind them in a way that made it feel less like a welcome and more like he had just decided to stop running. The office carried the old smell of antiseptic and paper air stale, with the discipline of keeping the past on a shelf. Vargas poured coffee that had given up trying and didn't drink any of it, then laid out a manila folder with tape scars on its edges, a folder that had been opened and opened until its geometry forgot itself. "You called it dawn," he said. "I haven't slept since 2002, so it didn't wake me." He glanced at Knox's badge and then at McCall's hands as if watching for a tremor. "Tell me how far you're willing to go before I show you how far we already went." McCall said, "We know the chain was wrong," and he smiled without joy. "Child, the chain was a necklace of stones around our necks, and all of us nodded like it was jewelry." He opened the folder. X-rays, black and whites, photocopies of photocopies that had lost fidelity, and still refused to stop speaking. "Your Jane Doe," he said, tapping a radiograph came in 1999, found off a service road outside Marlow Creek. Partial remains. No head, no hands. Pelvis suggested late teens. Fibers on fabric suggested uniform of a diner. "We kept her as Doe 99. 06 because the database was primitive, and nobody wanted the county bill for shipping a nameless child to the state lab for trace work that might tell us only the color of her tragedy." He flipped to a chart, pencil marks in the margin, signatures stacked like nervous footprints. Kavanaugh signed intake. That part is clean. The part that isn't. He turned another page. Is where he also signed release 2 years later. No requisition from a university. No interagency transfer. Just returned to originating authority. If you're thinking evidence locker, congratulations, you've learned the first rule of small-town pathology politics is a freezer with a padlock, and the key is the sheriff's smile. McCall felt the room change shape. Then in 2001, she said, "Claire disappears and a body appears." Vargas nodded once, slow. "A body," he said, "with no skull to match a dental chart we never took, with ribs that told a story about a heavy object, and a shallow grave with clothing fragments that had seen a laundromat no one bothered to ask about, and with a pendant the whole town could identify in their sleep." He slid the X-ray aside and lifted a Polaroid. She had never seen the pendant lying on a stainless tray. The word hope bright against metal and fluorescence. "They put it in my hand." "Detective," he said, voice small now, like the confession had to kneel to get out. "Keller, Heller. A deputy whose name I don't remember, because he never looked at me. He looked at the clock. They asked me to confirm what everyone already wanted, and I did the coward's arithmetic. I thought grief needs a place to sit. Give it a chair, not a maze. So I signed Claire Sutton's name on a Jane Doe and told her mother the worst lie is mercy." Knox's jaw set. "Why resign?" Vargas looked at his hands. "Because the next day I couldn't stop washing them." He reached under the desk and brought up a microcassette recorder the size of a wallet, old enough to have retired and still working, because time has a soft spot for machines that keep secrets. "I kept my notes," he said. "Not the kind they teach. The kind a human writes when his license is louder than his conscience." He pressed play. A younger Vargas spoke in the flat cadences of a man narrating his own witness statement, dates, temperatures, case numbers, the weight of bones, the weight of silence. Then a line that crystallized the air Deputy D. Keller present during identification. Sheriff M. Kavanaugh observes from doorway. Directive expedite release. No dental comparison performed. McCall felt something in her spine lock and then slide. Kavanaugh was in the doorway, she said half to herself. "He never left the doorway," Vargas said. He stood where nobody could see him and still made the room stand straighter. She told him about the dark room and the negatives stamped first rehearsal, and the caprice on the bridge 2 years early, and his mouth thinned until it almost disappeared. "You think I didn't see the practice bleeding through?" He said, voice gone huskier now. "You think I didn't know I was authorizing more than a death certificate I quit, because I finally figured out the difference between signing a form and swearing an oath. The form ends when your pen lifts. The oath wakes you up at night." Knox leaned back, eyes on the door body, listening for a footstep. "We need chain of custody copies and whatever you squirreled away to keep yourself from drowning," he said. Vargas opened a drawer, lifted a false bottom as casually as a man pouring tea, and brought out 2 sealed envelopes, wax-brittle names penned in a hand that had not forgiven itself, one labeled MKAL, the other Rangers. He gave them the Ranger package first. Inside, he said 3 things: my statement, the tape you heard, and a copy of the 1999 Doe intake with Kavanaugh's signature. I made the copy the day I resigned and hid it because I still wanted to live in my house. Forgive me that part. He turned to McCall with the second envelope lighter, colder. "For you," he said. "Photos that never made it to evidence. Delivered to me in 2002 by a boy who said a badge told him cameras could stop time from lying. He wanted to believe. He gave me the prints and cried like he'd been drafted. He didn't say the boy's name. He didn't have to." The prints inside showed the iron bridge again, the diner window, the faces cut by reflections. In one, Claire sat in the passenger seat of a black Caprice, hands in her lap, eyes on something outside the frame. Not fear, not consent, something in between that surrendered children learn when adults decide to hold the map. The driver's silhouette was a shoulder with rank and the shine of a radio mic. In the back seat, half a face in a sliver of glass. Megan, younger by 2 years than the memory of her guilt mouth. A straight line like someone practicing being invisible. In the bottom border, the same jagged hand she now knew like an enemy's perfume had written one line: Escort Practice 1999. McCall felt the floor tilt. "They rehearsed with her," she said. Vargas shook his head. "They rehearsed with everyone," he said. Claire was a role before she was a name in a file. He walked to the blinds and lifted 2 slats with 2 fingers and the caution of a man who had memorized the cost of daylight. "You have maybe 10 minutes, he said. "The sheriff called me yesterday. He asked if I still believed in privacy. I told him I believed in bones. He said bones can be persuasive. That was his poetry." Knox took the envelopes, stowed them beneath his jacket, and for a moment the room felt like it had acquired armor. "One more thing," McCall said. "The caption we received this morning. She didn't fall, she was escorted. Who writes that if not someone inside Vargas held her eyes until she saw the lifetime in his?" "A student," he said finally. "Back when the high school still taught film instead of phones. They used to bring kids into the darkroom to see how truth appears if you treat it with patience. I remember one boy who never took his eye off the enlarger. Smart, quiet, learned too fast. I think he was the one who brought me these prints. I think someone made him part of a club he thought was about pictures and found out it was about permission." Name, Knox said. Vargas shook his head. "I can't be sure. He wore the year like a uniform. 99 on his hoodie. That's all I have." Knox's phone vibrated a message from a private channel that rarely hummed without consequence. 2 unmarked vehicles left Marlow Creek 20 minutes ago. Cell pings put Keller near loop, 410. He showed it to them without commentary. Vargas replaced the blinds and leaned on the windowsill, like a man remembering how to end a speech he had never planned to give. "Go to the lab," he said. "State will lock this down if you ask with the right words. Do not return to your town without a crowd. That's how you survive men who prefer closed rooms." The first flash blossomed on the glass like a wound. Not lightning, a Polaroid. Close. Vargas didn't flinch. "He followed you," he said. "He follows everything now." The second flash came from the stairwell, then the sound of a door forced without politeness, a voice barking clear with the confidence of men who think a hallway is a funnel. Knox moved to the interior door, subtle and fast, the kind of fast that doesn't make sound. McCall gathered the prints with hands that remembered how to steal truth, slid them into her jacket, and looked once at Vargas. Come with us, she said. He smiled a small, sad refusal. The only thing keeping me alive is that I stayed, he said. If I leave, I become a chase. If I stay, I'm a problem only paperwork can solve. Footsteps crossed tile. Another flash. Another caption slid under the door, a strip of white with handwriting still wet. Sheriff meets doctor, history repeats. Vargas lifted an eyebrow, like a man who had finally lost the privilege of surprise. Backstairs, he said, and handed McCall a key card and a code scrawled on the back of a business card he'd stopped handing out when he retired. The back hallway smelled like bleach and old rain. Knox counted beats, moved on the offbeat, and they reached the service elevator as voices filled the front like water. The doors closed, and the world shrank to a box only big enough for 3 people and their decisions. When they opened in the basement garage, air hit them hard and cold, and a shape peeled off a concrete pillar like a page. The hooded figure raised a camera and fired. The flash washed the world flat, and for one instant McCall saw the photographer's face inside the white, too young to carry that much habit. Eyes empty the way a locked room is empty, mouth shaped around a breath he never intended to share. He ran nimble and pre-practiced through a gap no adult's shoulders could love, and Knox didn't chase because he had learned what prey looks like when it enjoys the game. They reached the truck and merged with the city like a rumor clear of the compound before the unmarked cars turned in clear of Keller's bad weather by luck and velocity. On the interstate, McCall took the passenger visor down and slid the Polaroid that mattered into the clip Claire in the Caprice hands in her lap. The badge in the glass like a pilot taping a child's drawing to a cockpit, a talisman against old men with rituals. Vargas gave us bones, Knox said. Now we make them stand up. She texted a state lab contact with the code Vargas had given word she never thought she'd string together with her own thumb's emergency intake. Coroner material with officer signatures. Urgent chain. Threat vector present. The reply came from a number with no name. Doc 3. 30 minutes. No lights. They drove south of downtown toward a warehouse district the map pretended not to love, and as the sky flattened to noon and the city forgot them. McCall allowed herself one fast, sharp memory. Claire at 19 in a borrowed uniform with a name tag that hid more than it told a girl who believed a camera could rescue her. From the oldest story in America, a girl who climbed into a black car because a badge said it would take her home, a girl who learned what escort means when the road belongs to men who own the caption. She closed her eyes just once and made a promise that sounded like a headline and a prayer. Sharing a throat, she would publish the truth in the oldest newspaper the state still reads evidence, and she would make the caption a confession the town could not forgive. They reached Dock 3 half an hour before the city realized what was happening. The sun bleeding through a lattice of industrial cranes and rusted beams, the smell of the river thick and metallic. The warehouse looked abandoned, corrugated walls dented like an old lung windows blinded with dust, but a single door near the loading bay had a new keypad, the kind installed by someone who trusted locks more than people. Knox parked behind a stack of shipping containers scanning for tails. Nothing. No cruisers, no unmarked SUVs, just the hum of a generator somewhere deep in the maze. McCall's hand went to her jacket, feeling the edges of the photos, the letter from Vargas. The tape, all of it pressed against her ribs like an alternate heartbeat. They stepped inside. The air was colder. The light thin filtered through high panes crusted with grime. At the far end, 2 technicians in white lab coats stood near a steel table under bright lamps. One of them, a woman with short silver hair, turned as they approached. Detective McCall, she asked. Dr. Harper McCall said state forensics. Harper nodded, professional, but wary. Dr. Vargas called ahead, she said. Said you'd be bringing something that doesn't exist. McCall laid the envelope on the table, spreading the contents like an autopsy. The negatives, the chain of custody form with Kavanaugh's signature, the Polaroids of the Caprice, the photo of Claire in the passenger seat. Harper adjusted her glasses, her expression tightening. This is a crime scene that's been aging in plain sight, she said. You want verification, DNA provenance, everything Keller buried. And quickly, Knox added, we're being followed. Harper nodded once, already motioning to her assistant. Then let's get it under glass. As they worked, McCall wandered to the window looking out over the water where barges crawled toward the Gulf. The wind off the river carried a low hum that reminded her of the quarry empty space pretending to be calm. Behind her, Harper's voice broke the silence. You said this girl's name was Claire Sutton. Yes, then you'll want to see this. She gestured to the screen. On it, the computer had parsed DNA from a bone fragment in the sample Vargas provided. Harper pulled up another file records from the state's 1999 Doe case digitized years ago, but never cross-referenced. These two don't match, she said. The body you buried under Claire Sutton's name isn't Claire Sutton. McCall felt the floor shift. So the remains in the quarry belong to the 1999 Doe. Harper nodded. The real Claire Sutton's DNA was entered into the missing persons database by her mother in 2010 when the state upgraded its system. That profile has never matched any remains until now. She loaded a third file, the one from a cold case unearthed in a floodplain near Austin dated 2003. The remains had been labeled as unknown female #43, never identified. The DNA was the same. Claire Sutton had been found 20 years ago, 2 years after the night she vanished. Buried under another name, another jurisdiction, another story. My God, McCall whispered. She lived for 2 years after that night. Harper turned off the monitor. Whoever buried her outside Austin wanted her to stay invisible. Someone with reach. Keller Knox muttered. He and Kavanaugh had friends in every county south of Dallas. McCall's pulse thudded in her ears. The photo of Claire in the car, the word escort it all, snapped into focus. They didn't kill her that night, she said. They took her. Used her. And when she stopped cooperating, they buried her as someone else. Harper frowned. Cooperating how McCall hesitated. Those Polaroids, they weren't trophies. They were documentation. Proof. A system. She looked down at the photo of Claire in the passenger seat, her expression calm, resigned. They were teaching her, grooming her to take the pictures next. The room went silent. The hum of the generator deepened, then faltered. Knox's head snapped up. Backup power just kicked in, he said, which means main grid went offline. Harper's assistant checked the panel. We're not supposed to lose power here. It's isolated. McCall's phone buzzed, once unknown number image attached. She opened it. A live photo of the warehouse's exterior taken seconds ago. The caption, "Delivery accepted." She looked toward the door just as a shadow passed across the frosted glass. Lights off, Knox ordered. The lab went dark, only the emergency exit signs glowing faint red. Harper whispered, "There's another way out, loading bay." McCall tucked the photos into her jacket, heart pounding. The shadow outside moved again, slower this time. Then a metallic clatter, something being dropped deliberately. A canister rolled under the door, hissing. Gas, Knox shouted, grabbing Harper's arm. They ran. The air filled with chemical fog, burning her throat, turning the world into a blur of shapes and coughing. Knox shoved open the bay door, and the light outside, blinding. They stumbled into the yard as a black SUV roared around the corner, tires screeching. Keller stepped out, clean suit face, cut by sunlight, gun drawn. "Detective McCall," he said evenly, "you've been busy." "So have you?" She coughed. "Running from your own crimes?" He smiled the kind of smile men wear when they've practiced it in mirrors. "No one's running. You've done half my work for me, found the evidence, gathered the witnesses. All I have to do now is control the story." Knox stepped in front of her. "You're finished, Keller." "I was finished 20 years ago," Keller said. "This is just maintenance." He raised his weapon. McCall's hand found her own, lifted it slow, steady. "You killed Claire Sutton," she said. "And the girl before her. And every woman whose photo you let rot in the darkroom." "I didn't kill them," Keller said. "I organized them. We made them matter. They were going to disappear anyway. We gave their stories a purpose." He took a step closer. "You wouldn't understand. You never lived in a town that needs its monsters to survive." The sound of an engine behind him cut through the air, a second vehicle sliding into the yard, siren wailing once before dying. State police. A woman in tactical gear stepped out, rifle raised. "Drop it." Sheriff Keller hesitated. McCall saw the calculation in his eyes. The camera flash, he'd grown used to the headline he'd already written for himself. Then he turned the gun toward her. The shot cracked. Time split open. Keller staggered first, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He fell to his knees, staring at McCall like she'd stolen his ending. "You were supposed to be the photo," he rasped, not the caption. Then he collapsed. The state officer lowered her weapon, stepping forward to cuff the silence. Knox exhaled hard, lowering his gun. McCall stood still, the air around her thick with smoke and dust and the faint click of cooling metal. "You good?" Knox asked. "No," she said. "But she is." She handed him the Polaroid of Claire, the last one Vargas had saved. "We'll make sure the truth doesn't die in another file." Harper reappeared, coughing, holding the DNA printout. "State confirmation is official," she said. "We can prove everything." McCall nodded. "Then let's give her back her name." The sirens grew louder, the yard filling with uniforms, cameras, questions. But for the first time in 20 years, the flashes belonged to justice. They buried Claire Sutton under her own name on a morning that arrived pale and careful, like the town was afraid to wake her too fast, and the headline that had chased us for weeks finally reached a full stop that sounded like a bell in cold air. The state lab verified the switch. The Rangers seized the evidence lockers and the darkroom boxes. The Attorney General's office sent a convoy of truth that parked along Main Street like a line of thunderheads, and still the town tried to speak in the smaller grammar it knew, words like accident and misunderstanding curling at the edges, while the cameras wrote larger sentences, but the facts did not bend. Keller's corruption was not a rumor, it was a staircase, each step with a name, and at the top of it stood the old sheriff Miles Kavanaugh, dead a decade and, finally, as visible as a watermark when you pull a sheet to the light. They unspooled bank records over time logs, dispatch anomalies, and the tapes Vargas kept because he did not know how else to survive his memory. And the map they drew across 20 years looked like a web that had been pretending to be a roof catching girls who slipped and telling the town the rain was the problem. The trial arrived faster than anyone predicted because the state decided the speed of light is the only antidote for the speed of rumor, and even without Keller breathing to defend his ritual. The prosecution laid out each frame like a gallery, negative to print, to caption to chain of custody, and the jury moved through it like visitors who had never understood why certain pictures made them uneasy until the guide finally explained the trick of the glass. The names changed when the indictment did. Porter's death pinned to Keller's last calculus, Heller's signed letter entered as a man's attempt at a late truth. Vargas's testimony, a quiet scalpel that cut away the mask of official paperwork and showed the bone of a lie, and Megan O'Neill walked into that courtroom with a public defender and a face that had practiced not crying and told the story she had never planned to tell, how a night in 2001 was already the sequel to a night in 1999. How Claire wanted to leave, and the car that stopped beside them belonged to a uniform that made the world smaller. How Rourke learned the shape of panic from a badge. How the photos were supposed to be insurance and turned out to be currency. How the rehearsal had been the town's unspoken lesson and the performance the town's unspoken pride. In the gallery sat Claire's mother with hands folded like a prayer that had finally been allowed to stand up, and when the defense tried to say the quiet was tradition, she looked at the jury and did not speak. Because grief has always been a better witness than rage, and the verdict that returned at sunset felt less like victory and more like the decision to breathe without help for the first time in years. Guilty on conspiracy, guilty on evidence, tampering, guilty on official oppression, guilty on the cruelty of making a story out of a girl's life and calling it maintenance. After the cameras left, the town had to learn how to live without its caption, and that was when the smaller work began, the kind that does not fit on a Chiron lockers cataloged by hands that no longer trusted convenience. An anonymous hotline staffed by someone who laughs at the right time, a stipend to bring in DNA tests without passing the hat at church, a memorial behind the diner, where the wall once reflected conspirators, now built to reflect names. Not just Claire's, but the Jane Doe from 1999, and the other faces that emerged from negatives when the red lamp finally found the paper, a promise, written in steel that said, You cannot bury what is already seen, and someone put a camera on a pedestal, with a plaque that admitted the tool was never the villain the hands were. Ranger Knox was not much for ceremonies, but he stood at the back of that one with his hat tucked under his arm and a look on his face like a man who knows the difference between a storm ending and a roof repaired. And when I asked him later if he thought darkness ends ever, he said his grandmother used to say, "Darkness is just light taking the long way home." We posted the negatives to a state archive with the kind of redundancy that sleeps well. 3 copies in 3 cities and 1 under a mountain out of state. And we made a habit out of telling reporters to stop using the phrase cold case, like it describes the victims, not the desks. And when a podcaster tried to turn Claire into a brand, I mailed him a copy of the chain of custody log and the 2-sentence letter her mother wrote to be read at sentencing, which ended with, "Keep my daughter's name out of your mouth unless you can put it in a prayer." On a late afternoon that felt right, I drove back to the quarry, because that is what stories do. When they owe a debt, they return to the first door they knocked on and say thank you and I'm sorry in the same breath. The county had fenced the rim and posted signs that read unstable edge and do not enter. And I did the wise thing and stepped past them anyway, because I had something the sign did not. A reason. The pit was there. Like a giant's thumbprint, water pooled in the lowest curve, a heron, standing and thinking thoughts no camera could cheapen, and I said her name once just to see what the wind would do with it, and it did what wind does with names. It carried it until it found someone who needed to hear it, and I will never know who that was. I sat for an hour and let silence finish a paragraph that had crowded my chest for months. And I decided that an investigator's real job is not to close something, but to open something that should never have been locked. And I promised the air that the next time a file with edges older than their urgency crossed my desk, I would not call it cold, I would call it waiting. The town made its own promises in smaller instruments. The school board retired the darkroom and replaced it with a class on consent and media literacy, and a field trip to the state lab where truth is a machine with labels and dignities. The sheriff's office got a new sheriff who understood that glass doors are heavier than oak when you insist on keeping them clean. The diner hired 2 more servers and put a small plaque at the register that says, "Remember Claire," and means, "Do not tell yourself a story that helps you sleep if it makes someone else vanish," and at the truck stop outside town, a bulletin board that once hosted oil change coupons now holds flyers for missing persons from counties you do not visit unless you live there, and sometimes I stand in front of it and trace the stapled corners and think how fragile the world is when the people who hold it up are tired and kind. There was one more thread that the cameras did not follow, because it is not good television to wait in a library, and that was the boy who learned to love the enlarger the student Vargas remembered, but could not name. I found him because evidence leaves heat where it passes, and footprints are a kind of temperature, and a yearbook in a box no one had bothered to scan gave me a face to match to a service record, and then a short arrest from a different county that looked more like a cry than a crime. And when I finally sat across from him in a visitation room that painted everyone in the same tired green, he looked younger than the hand that had written the captions and older than the yearbook smile. And I realized I was talking to a messenger who mistook the message for a life. He admitted nothing because he had nothing to admit that would change what had already been said. But his eyes softened when I told him the archive would carry the truth under steel and redundancy. And he nodded like a man who has been waiting for someone to say the word safety without irony. And when I asked him if he had ever taken a photo that did not require an apology, he said once, at sunrise, a heron in a quarry. And he did not know why he chose that subject. And I did not tell him my guess because sometimes mercy is just a quiet agreement between 2 people who have no more to trade. In the weeks after the trial, news trucks thinned until only 2 locals kept showing up at council meetings and budget hearings. And one afternoon, a ribbon cutting for a small victims services office drew more school kids than politicians, which made it perfect. And at the back of the room stood Dr. Emil Vargas with a suit that fit like a penance and a light in his eyes that suggested a man might finally forgive 6% of himself if he keeps going. He shook my hand and said the state asked him to consult on a review of small county protocols, and I told him I hope they listened to his sentences as carefully as they ignored his silence, and he smiled the way men do when they realize their life did not end at the worst thing they did. It just became heavier and still possible. I asked Ranger Knox if he wanted to stop in Marlow Creek or keep rolling to the next county where a desk drawer would smell like damp paper, and somebody's daughter would be waiting to have her name said, right? And he said the thing he always says when his tank is half, and a promise outweighs a schedule. We go where the file points. And I laughed, because he is the only person I know who can make justice sound like a map, and not a myth. We drove through town, and people who once looked away when the uniform passed looked back and met our eyes. Not all but enough, and a teenage girl in a hoodie with a camera around her neck raised it and snapped a shot of the two of us through the windshield, and then waved and kept walking, and I did not feel hunted. I felt documented in the way that good towns document what they wish to become. Night has a way of returning to places that taught it the root, and there will be more storms, more men who prefer closed rooms, more girls who mistake a car door for a shortcut to safety, and still, I believe in the long way light takes. Because I stood at a grave where a name was put back on a life, and I saw a mother breathe a little, not a lot, but enough, and I watched a town relearn how to say we and mean it. And when I drove away the last time, the sign at the edge of Marlow Creek still said, "Welcome," and beneath it, someone had hung a smaller sign that said, "We see you," and maybe that is all a story like this can do at the end. Catch the pieces it once shattered and hold them in the same sentence, long enough for a headline to become something quieter, like a vow. So if you ask me how the case ends, I will tell you. It does not. Not really. It becomes a different kind of work carried by people who will never get paid enough. And every year on the day, the town lights the tree. The Suttons place a candle in their window, and the wick looks like a road from a distance, and close up looks like hope, and I park far enough away to be a courtesy, and I watch for a minute, and I say her name again in the old Texas cold, and I feel the camera in my pocket that I no longer hate, and I think this is how you close a circle without erasing the line. It drew to teach you where not to step again.